The Grand Republic, also known as the Galactic Republic, was a democratic federal union of planetary systems that spread across light years of space. Formed around 25,000 BBY, the Republic was unlike anything that came before it, with its role as the galaxy's primary political, military, and economic entity unchallenged. With its promise of representation for all planets and their life thereon, it stood as a beacon of freedom within the galaxy. And now, nearly 25,000 years after its founding, it was beginning to fall apart, with its once hopeful light being swallowed by an unseen dark force. Welcome to the Wizards and Warriors channel. We are glad to have you with us as we charter once more into the Star Wars universe. As is our custom, we invite you to get comfortable, grab a drink and maybe a few death sticks as we recount the tale of one of the most famous conflicts in sci-fi, the Clone Wars. Throughout its existence, the Republic was fraught with war, be it internal or external. Towards the latter half of its history, around 1032 BBY, the Jedi, the nominal protectors of the Republic, were finally victorious over their arch-nemesis the Sith, a splinter sect of the Jedi Order who caused the majority of the conflicts within the galaxy. This brought about an era known later as the Great Peace that lasted over 1,000 years, and saw no large-scale galactic conflicts. This peace was aided by the benefits of joining the Republic, which offered economic prosperity through trade with the rich core worlds, as well as planetary autonomy for all member states. With the Republic's military organizations having been disbanded during the Great Peace, the planets would defend themselves with the promised support of other members should any of them be attacked. Though with the Republic spanning nearly every corner of the galaxy, save for the large domain known as Hutt Space, inter-system wars rarely happened, and most problems were resolved by the Republic's utilization of the formidable Jedi Order as peacekeepers, whose presence was normally enough to end conflicts before they began. This era of peace would not last forever. As the Republic grew, larger cracks began to form within its bureaucratic system. The most glaring one was the dominance of the core worlds, which used their influential economies and massive populations to garner more power for themselves by exploiting the Mid and Outer Rim, with the latter taking the brunt of their schemes. They did this by not only outmaneuvering Outer Rim planets in the Senate, but also delaying Outer Rim systems from being formally admitted into the Republic. This left the Outer Rim as practically free territory for colonization and extraction of resources. The only way to stop this was to have the Republic intervene, but the process for such things took weeks or even months to decide upon, thanks to the Republic's bloated bureaucracy as well as meddling by the aforementioned core worlds. Many times, the Republic used the Jedi themselves to resolve matters in the Republic's favor, despite the member in question being in the wrong. The second factor causing the Republic's decline was the Jedi Order itself. With its primary foe gone, and the Republic granting them special privileges that functioned outside the law, the Order began to deform from its original purpose. Far from being neutral bystanders, they slowly transformed from guardians of peace into protectors of the Republic. Though these two occupations sound similar, they were not in the slightest. The Jedi toted that they followed the will of the Force, and all else wasn't their concern, leaving them beyond scrutiny. But in reality, the Jedi had confused the will of the Force for the good of the Republic, acting as policemen and ambassadors and playing their hand at politics. They would use their special privileges of free reign by seeking out Force-sensitive children to practically kidnap at an early age and indoctrinate them. This did not make them many friends, tainting their once sparkling reputation. Soon they became more and more detached from their previous image of selfless guardians, and in the eyes of the public, transformed from protectors of the people to watchdogs of the Republic. One of the consequences of these problems was that systems further from the core began to look to each other for help, for on one side they had the corrupt Republic looking to enslave them through bureaucracy, and on the other side the domain of the Hutt crime syndicate, seeking to literally enslave them. Thus, Mid and Outer Rim worlds began forming business unions and trade federations that were legally recognized in the Republic as businesses, but in truth functioned more as independent nations within the Republic, each having their own militaries through the use of droids. As time wore on, they gained more autonomy, even so far as being able to have representatives in the Senate, despite the fact the business members already had representatives. Though with time war might have been inevitable, it became a certainty when the Jedi's ancient foe returned and began to play as instigators behind the scenes. The first event that would trigger the downward spiral to war would occur in 32 BBY on the mid-rim planet of Naboo. A series of bills were passed in the Senate which made certain tax-exempt businesses eligible for taxation. This was primarily aimed at the largest corporation, known as the Trade Federation. With the Trade Federation being unable to overturn these bills, they resorted to drastic measures. In that year, they arrived at Naboo with a fleet of Lucrehulk-class freighters and blockaded the planet under the pretense of collecting the planet's debt to them. We won't go into the details of what would later be dubbed as the Naboo Crisis, but to summarize, Naboo appealed for aid and the Republic Senate, bloated as it was, could not effectively handle the dispute. The matter was resolved by Jedi ambassadors who aided the native inhabitants to liberate the planet. Faith in the Republic's current Chancellor, Finis Valorum, was lost in a vote of no confidence that was issued by the Queen of Naboo, Padme Amidala, and Senator Sheev Palpatine of Naboo was elected in his place. Though the Naboo crisis lasted no longer than 2 weeks, it put on display the ineptitude of the Republic. The fallout of the event had no lasting negative consequences for the Trade Federation, which found itself more or less intact in the aftermath, while the bills which they had started the whole conflict over were eventually repealed. Moreover, the Naboo crisis made a good portion of the outer and mid-rims turn towards the corporations instead, as decisive action in their eyes was better than inaction. But what was more concerning, at least to the Jedi, was the participation of a Dathomirian Sith assassin by the name of Maul, who seemed to have a hand in the events that unfolded. The re-emergence of their ancient foe, whom they thought long dead, set alarm bells off in the Jedi High Council, who now believed something more sinister was at play and would begin searching for the man they believed to be Maul's master. As the Jedi looked for their quarry, things in the galaxy began to deteriorate. Silent factions were forming in the Senate. Though no one said it outright, it became clear that many members wished to secede and began to look out for their own worlds while holding the Republic in contempt. Though 8 years would pass with nothing eventful happening on the surface, the Republic had become fragile, with many having to cautiously prepare any legislation and tiptoe around issues lest the Republic collapse. But though they tried, the Phantom Menace had waited long enough. In the Outer Rim system of Raxus, there was a relay station for the galaxy-wide HoloNet. This was a large communication system that was necessary for the Republic to use to relay important news and information to the galaxy as a whole. But in 24 BBY, it was hijacked by a former Jedi, the Count of Sereno, Count Dooku, who would use it to address the people of the galaxy in what would later come to be known as the Raxus Address, in which he denounced the Republic as corrupt and the Jedi Order as evil shadows of their former selves, hopelessly lost in their own ways. In this speech, Dooku claimed that it was time for those under Republic oppression to leave and form an independent body of their own, one not at the mercy of the Inner Rim. Dooku had been a political activist in his years since departing the Jedi Order, had been the leader of the independent movement for self-determination, and had spoken at universities across the galaxy. This led his Raxus address to be accepted as more than just anti-Republic rhetoric, but as a call of secession, one that many answered, as over the next 2 years, thousands of systems began flocking to Dooku's cause, with many more divided over the issue. Those that rallied around Dooku would be called Separatists. The Republic failed to respond effectively, just as the Separatists believed they would. Despite its larger power base, the Senate was deadlocked on what to do, but they did manage to issue the Republic Senate Non-Communications Law, which made it illegal for Republic representatives to meet with any representatives from the Separatists, in fear that it would legitimize them. However, all this really accomplished was further propelling the crisis. With that said, even had this law not been passed, it was very unlikely a peaceful resolution would have been met, as whilst the Separatists were forming a democracy, it was in fact entirely controlled by Dooku and his selective Separatist Council, and Dooku had no intentions of peace, as his plans were far more sinister than anyone realized. One of the matters that had been deadlocked in the Senate since the start of the Separatist crisis was the Military Creation Act, which would allow the demilitarized Republic to create a formal army. This was met with backlash by many, as it was seen as the point of no return should it be passed. The most vocal politician against this bill was the former Queen of Naboo, now Senator Padme Amidala, whom the pacifists rallied behind. This garnered her many enemies in the Senate and among the Separatists as well, in particular Count Dooku, who sent the bounty hunter Jango Fett to kill her, hoping to not only spur the Warhawks in the Senate to action, but also to appease the leader of the Trade Federation, Newt Gunray, who had been humiliated by Amidala when she captured him during the Naboo crisis, as her death was his condition for joining the Separatists. However, the two attempts on Padme's life would fail. Knowing her life was in mortal peril, the Jedi Council sent Jedi Knight Obi-Wan Kenobi to investigate a lead he had discovered while protecting the Senator in the last attempt. This led him to the mysterious planet of Kamino, which was inhabited by a likewise mysterious race known as the Kaminoans. Prior to his arrival, Obi-Wan had learned that the Kaminoans were known for their advanced cloning technology, even so far as cloning themselves into what they saw as perfect beings. The Kaminoans were heavily isolationist, and would only open up their homes to those with large enough pockets to pay for their services. However, upon his arrival, Obi-Wan was surprised to be received warmly by the Kaminoans who were expecting him. Then, once again to his surprise, he discovered the Kaminoans had been making a clone army for the Republic for years, supposedly ordered by the Jedi Council by means of Jedi Master Sifu Dyas. After reporting this information to the Council, he hunted down Jango Fett, whom he found was serving as the template DNA for the clone army. Fett escaped just barely, and fled to the Outer Rim desert planet of Geonosis with Kenobi in pursuit. There, Kenobi made another discovery. Geonosis had become home to many large droid foundries, each capable of making thousands of battle droids, as well as a large fleet of ships, consisting of 60 Trade Federation core ships, 41 Diamond-class cruisers, and 286 Hartzell-class transports. What's more, as he tracked Fett, he stumbled upon a meeting of the Separatist Council being held by Dooku, which included many system corporations, such as the Trade Federation and the Techno Union. Having listened in, he discovered it was their intent to build up the droid army and force the Senate to accept their secession from the Republic as the new Confederation of Independent Systems, or CIS. Moreover, Kenobi discovered that Dooku had been the one who hired Fett. Kenobi hurriedly returned to his ship, but could not transfer his message to Coruscant. However, he was able to get it to his Padawan Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine, who relayed it to Coruscant. He would do this just in time, as Kenobi was then discovered and set upon by the native Geonosians. Their numbers eventually overwhelmed him and he was captured. With the new threat realized, and knowing that Kenobi's capture would most likely lead to his death, the Jedi sprung into action. Jedi Master Mace Windu assembled a strike force of 212 Jedi Knights and Padawans and headed for Geonosis. Kenobi's report was relayed to the Senate, who now realized the danger they were in, though the peace faction led by Senator Bail Organa would not back down. A motion was given by Naboo's representative in place of Amidala, Jar Jar Binks, to grant the Supreme Chancellor emergency powers, which he could use to bypass the Senate's permission to produce legislation. The motion passed, and Palpatine allowed for the creation of the Grand Army of the Republic. Jedi Master Grand Yoda thus departed for Kamino to marshal the clones that the Kaminoans had fully produced. When Windu's force arrived at Geonosis, they learned that Kenobi was to be executed within the Petranaki arena. Having evaded detection, they made their way there, where they found Kenobi as well as Skywalker and Padme Amidala fighting for their lives. Amidala was put in Skywalker's care, while Kenobi led the investigation, and the pair made an impromptu rescue attempt ahead of Master Windu, but were likewise captured. Windu dispatched Master Clephanopus to infiltrate the outer edges of the arena to disable its defenses and take out the guards, which they did successfully, allowing Windu and his force to sneak into the arena in disguise. Windu cornered Dooku and the Separatist Council and held them at lightsaber point. This was the signal, and all the Jedi revealed themselves. The sheer shock caused all the Geonosian warriors to flee in terror. However, Dooku had anticipated this, and a legion of battle droids were unleashed into the arena. Windu was driven off by many of these, and he retreated into the arena grounds, where the other Jedi had congregated. A massive fight ensued, and even though the Jedi cut down a large portion of the battle droids and even managed to kill Jango Fett, the droids' numbers began to win out, and the Jedi were surrounded and reduced to a handful when Dooku ordered a ceasefire before demanding their surrender. Windu declined, but just as Dooku was to give the order to fire, Yoda arrived with a regiment of clones in dropships and saved the Jedi before withdrawing from the arena. The Grand Army of the Republic had arrived. Having made a sudden appearance over the atmosphere of Geonosis in their 12 Acclamator-class assault ships, they quickly deployed their force of 295,000 clone troopers and their equipment onto the ground. The Separatists were sent into a panic by both the numbers and the army that seemed to suddenly come into existence. The Trade Federation, upon seeing this, immediately fled to their ships, hoping to escape the unfolding battle, whilst Dooku and the rest of the Council made their way to the command center to oversee the conflict. Those that remained of the Jedi made their way to the front line and acted as impromptu commanders and led the clones into the fray, targeting the Trade Federation's ships and the droid foundries, hoping to capture them intact. Thanks to the suddenness of their assault, the Separatists had the majority of their heavy equipment loaded on their ships. What's more, the clones had jammed communications, leading to the Separatist army, which easily numbered over 1 million droids, to be thrown out desperately at the clones with little to no orders beyond to kill the enemy in front of them. Knowing the battle to be most likely lost, Dooku had all the available droids attack the clones, hoping to buy their navy time to escape. What happened after this was more akin to a brawl than a battle, as the clones held the upper hand thanks to their heavy equipment. Especially effective were the clones' self-propelled heavy artillery turbolasers. This stood in stark contrast to the Separatists, who, having no time to deploy their ground shields, had no defense. The droids were destroyed en masse, and Separatist ships were ripped out of the sky and destroyed in their docks. But the clones were taking heavy casualties as well. The Jedi's obsession with taking out the escaping ships led them to brashly advance forward, leading to an incoherent battle line, as the desert dust kicked up across the field, and the only thing that could be seen were the flashes of blue and red blaster fire while starships screamed overhead. This brawl lasted until all the Separatist forces had either fled or been killed, leaving the planet to the Republic. While the battle was a victory for the Republic, with the Separatists losing their army, a major source of droid production, as well as 136 ships, Dooku and the Council had escaped, as well as the majority of their core ships. The battle, though a triumph, would not bring any long-term strategic gain for the Republic. Meanwhile, the idea that the Republic had a hidden army all this time on standby led the CIS to fully commit to the war at hand, seeing negotiations as not an option for now before they had proven their mettle. The Jedi also suffered disillusion, as their force of 212 had been reduced to only 29, a staggering casualty count. Although there were many more Jedi, the battle on Geonosis would show that they weren't in fact invincible, and they weren't ready for this new war. The Republic likewise began to order thousands more large ships and starfighters. Unknown to both sides, Dooku made his way to Coruscant after the battle, and met with his fellow conspirator, the Dark Lord of the Sith himself, Darth Sidious, to tell him that the war had commenced, to which Sidious was pleased, and told Dooku, who he referred to now as Darth Tyrannus, to continue to lead the Separatists while he manipulated the Republic. A dark shadow had fallen, and the Clone Wars had begun. In the aftermath of Geonosis, the fragile state of the galaxy finally shattered. Though the Republic had won the war's first battle, they were in a worse position following the start of hostilities, as hidden Separatist droid armies were unleashed from their bases, forcing the Republic to scramble to deploy their new army to these fronts. In the early stage of the war, the primary strategic goal for both sides was to secure crucial hyperspace lanes. Hyperspace lanes were established routes used by ships to traverse the galaxy with relative safety, as one of the primary concerns when it came to traveling with light speed was crashing into celestial bodies such as asteroid fields and planets. These discovered lanes were of vital use to transport supplies between the rims, and the planet systems on these routes benefited greatly as depots from which ships could resupply, as well as a place to distribute their goods in their respective rim. Invading these planets was not as simple as deploying your army on the surface and waiting it out. as these were entire planets that not only needed to be conquered but garrisoned as well, which required time in which either side could call upon reinforcements. To this end, each side would develop their strategies to blockade planets and deploy ships which could help them do so. The Separatists, though consisting of many systems, had lower populations than their adversaries. To make up for this disparity, they utilized battle droids, which they could produce and deploy en masse. On top of their droid army, the Separatists also possessed highly mobile heavy equipment. They also had an impressive officer corps that they took pride in, as they were willing veterans who fought in the Outer Rim and were defending their homes. Moreover, unlike the Republic, they were not using humanoid slaves, which they saw the clones to be, as cannon fodder. This made their army act highly aggressive, and they were usually the ones to start campaigns and invasions. Their capital ships were the famous Lucrehulk-class battleship, which was capable of holding entire armies. In addition to this were the Munificent-class and Providence-class warships, highly capable offensive ships that sported some of the heaviest turbocannons in the galaxy. The Republic, in contrast, was a primarily defensive army. Even though they had to initiate their fair share of invasions, their offensive attacks were meticulous and careful. This can be seen with their heavy equipment, such as the AT-TE, which was capable of taking down their opposition before the lighter vehicles and LA-AT dropships would swoop in to exploit the gaps. Their initial ships, the Acclamator class, which they used at Geonosis, were still in use, but they were well aware that these posed little threat to their formidable Separatist opponents. Thus, these ships were moved to a support role, in favour of the Venator-class Star Destroyer. The Venators held formidable guns, as well as a large number of starfighters, which, unlike the Separatists, who used droid-controlled ships, used able-bodied pilots, giving the Republic an edge as their fighters could maneuver more creatively. The initial stages of the conflict were smaller in scale than what they would later become, so the majority of the early fighting was done via skirmishing above planets, with the winner being able to deploy below. Those planets they couldn't afford to spend manpower on were instead fought over in proxy wars, with each side funding rebels on said worlds, and it is for this reason that the war would be called the Clone Wars rather than the Clone War, as a number of smaller conflicts occurred at the same time, either through outside interference or already existing internal issues that now escalated as the authority of the Republic was not present. Once the front lines had become established, the war started in earnest. The Separatists had come to wrest control of parts of the hyperspace lanes, but were held in deadlock in a good number of the systems. In one of the first major operations of the war, they set their sights on the planet Christophis. Christophis was a crystalline planet that not only served as a good base, but was also valuable in its resources. Several months after the war had begun, the second major battle was to begin. The invasion was to be under the command of General Worm Loathsome. Though we do not know of his deeds, he was considered a legend within the Inner Rim. Accompanying him would be the equally famous Admiral Trench, who had a decorated naval career. Although we do not know the exact numbers of their ground forces, we know Trench commanded one Providence-class dreadnought, his flagship the Invincible, around 25 Munificent-class star frigates, and at least 6 Lucrehulk-class battleships. The elites of Christophis had tried to maintain a position of neutrality prior to this, but with the Separatist fleet arriving in the system, they fled. The citizens of the planet, however, were not going to accept this change in leadership, and instead decided to band together with the Republic garrison force and fight. The Separatists landed on the planet's surface uncontested, and subsequently made their way towards the cities, where fighting broke out. The resistance tried all it could, but couldn't stand against the Separatist force, and was forced to fall back. Once it became apparent that they couldn't win on their own, they sent a request to the Republic for aid. The Republic was tied up in different sectors still, and so sent a relief mission led by Senator Bail Organa in advance of their mustering force. He landed on the planet and took command of the defense, but they were still being pushed back until they were confined into the eastern exurbs. However, Organa had done more than enough, and at this time the Republic finally arrived. The vanguard of the Republic fleet arrived under the now Jedi Knight and General Anakin Skywalker, who had just arrived from his mission to Kudo 3, where he helped the natives liberate the planet. His force consisted of 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers under Admiral Wolf Yularen, including his flagship, the Resolute, and several Pelter-class frigates, which were carrying the supplies Organa desperately needed. Upon arrival, he found the planet blockaded by Admiral Trench. General Obi-Wan Kenobi, who was commanding the main force, had sent Skywalker ahead, but informed him not to engage the enemy. Nevertheless, Skywalker tried to force his way through first, with a general assault. He then attempted to run the blockade, but his frigates began taking fire as Trench pressed his command ship forward and focused upon them. Kenobi soon arrived aboard the Negotiator and suggested Skywalker break off the assault, which he did, covering the frigate's retreat before withdrawing his Venators to rendezvous with Kenobi behind Lilis, the Christophis moon. While the blockade around the planet was formidable, it was not impregnable. However, Kenobi knew that if they tried to break it, Organa wouldn't last. To this end, he revealed to Skywalker his secret weapon, the IPV-2C stealth corvette. This was an experimental vessel that was equipped with a cloaking device that rendered the ship invisible. Giving the ship to Skywalker's command, he was to bypass the blockade and deliver the supplies. After they were stocked, Skywalker set out towards Christophis, with Yularen accompanying him. As they were passing through the blockade, they came into the path of a number of droid hyena starships. The crew was afraid that they'd been detected, but Skywalker kept his calm. The droids passed harmlessly overhead, with their target instead being Organa's base, where they commenced a bombing run. This was a maneuver by Trench, as he had grown tired of the Republic cowards hiding behind the moon, and wanted to put pressure on them to relieve the Senator. This worked, but not the way he had expected, as instead of Kenobi launching an assault, it was Skywalker who decloaked the ship and fired torpedoes upon the Invincible. These torpedoes were stopped as Trench had the shields raised in time, but his torpedoes were also stopped in turn, as Skywalker recloaked his ship in time and evaded the laser fire spread Trench deployed. Trench was still confident, as he had dealt with cloaked ships before, and baited Skywalker to attack him via open comms. This attempt at goading was successful, for Skywalker soon decloaked and fired again, leading to Trench locking on to his magnetic signature, which could be used to track him as he cloaked again. Trench then had the shields lowered so he could launch his tracking torpedoes, which followed Skywalker. But unbeknownst to Trench, Skywalker had tricked him instead, as he had learned of Trench's history with fighting cloaked ships, and correctly surmised that it was his magnetic signature he used to track them. With Trench falling for the ploy, Skywalker decloaked the ship, put all power into the thrusters, and made a beeline towards the Invincible. Trench thought he was going to fire again, and ordered the shields raised, but the shield generators had not recharged, and soon Skywalker's ship narrowly passed above the bridge, as Trench realized his enemy's plan, and the Invincible's bow was hit with the torpedoes, rendering the ship inoperable. Skywalker then made way for Organa's refugee camp, as Kenobi capitalized on the disorder in the blockade and launched an immediate attack, which broke through it and allowed him to land troops in Chalidonia, the capital of the planet, where they set up base in the Western District. With the Republic's arrival in full force in the form of Kenobi's 212th Attack Battalion under Marshal Commander Cody, and Skywalker's 501st Legion under Captain Rex, Organa was relieved of command, and the Republic was able to expand their control over most of the city. However, all was not lost for the Separatists, for even though the Republic had broken the blockade, the Separatist navy hadn't retreated in the wake of Trench's demise, so supplies to both sides came in regularly. Thus, with Admiral Yularen incapable of driving the Separatists out of the planet's orbit, the battle would be decided on the ground. Another thing the Separatists had was numbers. Though we don't know the exact numbers, the droids did outnumber the clones, as we can infer from the following battle. It is probable that General Loathsome didn't immediately press the Republic, as they had time to set up their base fully within Chalidonia. Most likely, the first assaults were probe attacks towards each street, as the cities of Christophsis were foreign and inaccessible to outsiders. Having found his point of attack, he prepared his assault, and just where the Jedi intended him to attack, as they set up an ambush between two towers, which flanked north and south of the road, with Kenobi in the south and Skywalker in the north. Just as the droids got within range, the column split and marched towards the tower entrances instead. Kenobi sensed something was wrong. His hunch was correct, for soon the south tower was set upon by a large number of battle droids. Upon learning of this, Skywalker leapt into action. He pulled up a dropship to the south tower, and then had his troopers fire their ascension cables towards the opposite tower, and they ziplined over to aid Kenobi's command. Having done so, they were able to retreat to the turbo lift and ascend to the roof, where they boarded the dropship and escaped. Returning to the command base, the Republic commanders wanted to determine how the Separatists knew of their plan. Luckily, a clone had been able to rip the head off a tactical droid before his escape, and this gave Republic military command some of the information it needed. They were able to confirm that the enemy knew of the ambush, confirming that there was a spy in their midst. Rather than waiting to find the culprit, Kenobi decided to sneak behind enemy lines along with Skywalker to hopefully find information of their own, leaving clone commanders Cody and Rex to contain the security breach. Kenobi and Skywalker made it to the Separatist headquarters without hindrance. Even though they had deduced it to be a trap and that the spy had tipped off the enemy, they went ahead anyway, finding the Sith assassin Asajj Ventress waiting for them. A fight broke out, and although neither side could make ground, the two Jedi did determine they were right in that they had been betrayed from within. Moreover, they discovered Ventress had brought more droids to aid Loathsome, and they were preparing to attack. Kenobi and Skywalker quickly broke off the fight and headed for the HQ, which they found aflame. The spy had been apprehended, and it was a clone trooper named Slick. But before he was caught, he managed to destroy several pieces of heavy equipment, as well as the weapons depot, putting them in a poor situation as the Separatists were primed to bear down upon them. At this point, the Separatists had pushed the front line back in the capital and directed their focus at the city centre, which Kenobi had made into the forward command centre. The next morning, Loathsome attacked with a large array of battle droids and 3 Octuptara tri-droids. However, this assault was repelled as the Republic's heavy cannons were still operable and wreaked devastation on the tightly packed column. Still, since the sabotage at the main base, the Republic had yet to have a chance to resupply. Admiral Yularen was doing everything to hold the breach they had made within the Separatist blockade, and needed to have the chance to resupply the ground forces adequately. To worsen the situation, the Separatists sent even more ships to Christophis and forced Yularen into retreat. The Republic ground forces were now on their own, but Admiral Yularen was able to send a distress call to the Jedi Temple, which up until now were unaware of just how dire the situation was, so the plan was to hold the Separatists off until Yularen could arrive in force to reinforce them. Loathsome was aware that the Republic would likely return, and so made preparations for a final assault. The plan hinged upon a large deflector shield generator, which they set up behind the front line. This would generate a hemisphere shield that would slowly grow to eventually encompass where the Republic's heavy cannons were located, and whilst it was expanding, Loathsome's assault force would advance behind the shield, rendering the cannons useless. The clones observed this force to consist of everything Loathsome could muster, with B-1 and B-2 battle droids, AAT medium tanks, tri-droids, and the newly arrived NR-N99 Persuader tanks. The Republic quickly deduced his plan and set their forces in motion. Kenobi was to remain on the front line with Captain Rex to stall the advance, while Skywalker and his newly arrived Padawan Ahsoka Tano were to sneak behind enemy lines and destroy the deflector shield. Skywalker and Tano could sneak directly through the front with the clever use of a box, which the droids passed. Meanwhile, as the Separatists marched into the city centre, they were set upon by Kenobi and the clones, who had taken refuge in the numerous towers and attacked once the shield had passed their position. They made Loathsome pay for every block, but without any heavy equipment of their own, they were forced to fall back once the tanks reached them. This kept up until they had reached the forward command centre, at which point Kenobi ordered Rex to take the clones and retreat to the guns. Rex did so begrudgingly, leaving Kenobi to delay the enemy. Kenobi held them off until he could no more, at which point he surrendered himself to Loathsome. Loathsome then demanded he surrender all his forces, to which Kenobi agreed, and invited him to discuss the terms. In the ensuing parley, Kenobi played on Loathsome's ego with flattery. This worked, but this didn't end the advance. However, it did deprive the Separatists of their commander, which was Kenobi's intention. This bought Skywalker and Tano the time they needed to reach and destroy the deflector shield. Just in time, for Loathsome had nearly executed Kenobi, who infuriatingly went into every detail behind the surrendered terms. With the shield down, Rex ordered the cannons to resume fire, effectively ending the assault. More importantly, Yularen had returned, along with reinforcements from Wurz's fleet and Grandmaster Yoda. They were able to breach the blockade, and their fleet drove off the Separatist ships, forcing Loathsome, whom Kenobi had subsequently captured, to surrender, placing Christophis under Republic control, and ending the first major battle of the war. The Battle of Christophis served as the Republic's first morale boost since the start of the war, and showed that Jedi and clones could accomplish extraordinary feats with each other, and that the CIS's innumerable battle droids were not invincible. It also served as a wake-up call to the Separatists, who until now believed the Republic would simply cave under their onslaught of numbers and strategic commanders. Subsequently, the Separatists began looking for new ways to overcome their deficiencies. Ultimately, the battle served as a more sobering reminder that this was war, and from here on out, destruction and chaos would be the order of the day, because there were some who wanted exactly that. Not long after the Republic's victory on Christophis, they managed to similarly secure Dantooine. Despite the fact that the Republic managed to hold the world, would be a lesson in the war's brutality. The defense was led by Jedi Master Mace Windu against Separatist forces hoping to reinforce the nearby banking clan. Despite the massive size of the droid army, consisting of a variety of battle droids alongside massive seismic tanks, converted mining vehicles which operated by smashing the ground with enough force to send out a massive shockwave, Mace Windu and his meager defensive force proved victorious. This was thanks in no small part to the prowess of Windu himself, who single-handedly destroyed many of the battle droids present, although the battle left him and his forces in need of quick resupply. These twin victories on opposite sides of the galaxy bolstered the faltering morale of those within the Republic, who were beginning to fear the innumerable droid army would be unstoppable. But stopped they were, at least for now. Seeing that Separatist operations on Christophis were a loss, Count Dooku elected to try a different route, this time hoping to secure access to hyperlanes across Hutt space, as the Hutts had yet to side with either belligerent, despite both sides trying to negotiate. Instead, they intended to wait until the most lucrative deal arose. Dooku, however, would not wait, as the Republic was inclined to do. He hatched a plot in hopes of turning the leader of the Hutts, Jabba, against the Republic. To this end, he recalled his disciple, Asajj Ventress, from the front at Christophis and sent her on a mission to kidnap Rotta, the son of Jabba. She succeeded, and brought the Huttlet to the jungle planet of Teth. Dooku's plan continued to unfold as he hoped. The Jedi discovered and rescued the Huttlet, but a recording of the rescue was sent by Dooku to the Hutts, framing the Jedi as the culprits behind the initial kidnapping. In response, Jabba cut off all communication with the Republic and demanded his child's return before he was willing to agree to any proposal from the Separatists either. With his victory now at hand, Dooku ordered the young Hutt to be recaptured. This is where the plan began to unravel. Not only did Asajj fail to stop the Jedi from bringing Rotta back to Jabba, but Dooku's co-conspirator, Zero the Hutt, Jabba's uncle, was also arrested on Coruscant by the Guard under Commander Fox, with information provided by Senator Padme Amidala, who had discovered the plot. Amidala informed Jabba of Dooku's treachery, causing him to gladly sign a treaty with the Republic, delivering a major blow to the CIS. This setback, while not a coup de grace, needed to be reversed, or at least answered if the Confederacy hoped to maintain the faith of its citizens. They planned their next assault upon another target along the crucial Corellian run. This time it would be the Twi'lek planet of Ryloth. We won't go into detail about the Battle of Ryloth just yet, as we plan to cover it in a future video. So for now, we will talk about what transpired after the start of the invasion. Like Christophis before it, Ryloth sought to be a neutral planet, despite still being a member of the Republic, which maintained a small garrison on the world. But with its place on a major hyperspace lane, it was only a matter of when it would be attacked, rather than if. When the CIS forces under Wat Tambor attacked, Ryloth couldn't stand against the initial assault, and Separatist forces were able to eliminate the Republic fleet that kept the supply lines to Ryloth open. With supplies cut off and the planet occupied, the natives of Ryloth began to starve, as the planet itself had meager local food sources. Republic Senator Bail Organa from Alderaan stepped into the scene on behalf of the Jedi High Council, who sent him to negotiate with the leader of Toydaria, King Katunko, in the hopes of the Toydarians sponsoring a humanitarian relief effort. Organa failed to get King Katunko to agree to this thanks to the CIS also sending a delegate, but Katunko did allow Organa to secretly send the ships from Toydaria, which still counted to the Republic and Twi'leks as a win. The CIS began to worry as their initially overwhelming numerical advantage was starting to become moot, with the Republic finding their footing and producing more ships and clones. The Jedi were also becoming more proficient commanding them. realizing that numbers alone could no longer win the day, and still believing in the need for a decisive victory, the CIS would resort to trying to win through the use of superior technology. The CIS already relied heavily on technology, with the vast amount of their forces being automated, but in this case, they sought technology powerful enough to single-handedly win battles. The members of the CIS had interests in the field of technological development even prior to the war, looking into ships, battle stations, and even biochemical warfare with the production of a new airborne version of the infamous Blue Shadow virus. But this, like many of their plans, would fail to materialize, either due to budget or sabotage by the Republic. The first foray into this field, however, was with the new Subjugator-class heavy cruiser design. The Subjugator class were some of the largest ships produced up to that time, and were far larger than anything the Republic actively fielded. This ship shared a similar design language with the Providence-class carrier-destroyer, as both originated from the Freedak Engineering Corps and shipyards of Pamant. While there are a number of differences with the Providence, primarily in terms of quantity and sheer size, the main difference was the two experimental ion pulse cannons located on either side of the ship. These were directly connected to the ship's reactor, and when fired, they would release a ring-shaped ion wave that would cripple a ship's electronic components, rendering it inoperable for a time. The first of these to be built was named the Malevolence, and was sent to Count Dooku for him to inspect. While he was impressed with the ship, he decided he needed it to be field-tested before he could give it any formal duty. This test would have to be conducted in a manner that didn't draw the Republic's attention. He gave the duty of running these tests to his most trusted subordinate, the Kalish cyborg General Grievous. Though we have yet to mention him, General Grievous had been very active in the war, and had developed a fierce reputation by the time he came to command the Malevolence. He was not only made Supreme Commander of the Droid armies, but had come to be known as a capable general and a terrifying combatant. Many in the Republic believed him to be an unstoppable Jedi killer, a theory supported by his extensive collection of lightsabers taken from fallen opponents. Grievous was none too pleased with being seen as a droid, but he certainly lived up to the rest of his reputation as he plundered his way across worlds. He led the CIS armies to numerous victories, with no care for a given world's inhabitants, solely driven to complete his appointed task and to kill his most hated enemies, the Jedi, wherever he found them. With his new flagship, Grievous began to perform his orders to the letter, attacking and eliminating any force he came across, leaving no witnesses to report on the new secret weapon of the Separatists. The majority of his attacks, however, were concentrated upon the Open Circle fleet, which made up the majority of the force sent to Christophis. Despite the attempts at secrecy, it became widely believed that these losses to an unidentified foe were in fact caused by General Grievous, as Republic intelligence had discovered he had been placed in command of some new type of weapon. With the rumors that this weapon was the cause of recent losses, combined with the general's reputation, the Republic was actively on the lookout for the ship responsible. Under such scrutiny, Grievous could only keep himself hidden for so long, and he eventually came upon a fleet under the command of Jedi Master Ares Noon within the Fu system. This ambush was yet another success for Grievous tactically, as he destroyed the fleet and its commander. But this victory, more importantly, brought the attention of the Jedi High Council. Since a Jedi had been lost, they determined it was the ship they were looking for, and so sent forth the Republic's 4th Fleet under Jedi Master Plo Koon, who tracked Grievous and the Malevolence to the Abrogado system. General Plo Koon arrived and found his target. Seeing that the ship was preparing for battle, he did likewise, and the Republic fleet slowly approached their foe. Before they were in range, Grievous fired the massive ion cannon and took out the Republic's systems. Plo Koon ordered an immediate evacuation, as the Malevolence unleashed its firepower, destroying the fleet as it lay helpless in space. Plo Koon survived the initial carnage, as he and a number of clones made it to escape pods, but they were still in peril, as Grievous sent out hunter droids to search the debris field for any survivors. Luckily for Plo Koon, General Skywalker and his Padawan Ahsoka Tano arrived not long after the Council had lost contact with the fleet. Skywalker was ordered to continue his mission of protecting supply convoys, but he instead decided to look for Plo Koon. In his small Corellian light freighter, he searched the wreckage until he found Plo Koon and a number of clones, arriving just in time, as the survivors were desperately trying to hold off the hunting droids. After picking them up, Skywalker tried to beat a hasty retreat, but the Malevolence had detected them, and fired its ion cannon yet again. This time it couldn't catch its target, as Skywalker cleared the debris field and jumped into hyperspace. This event greatly displeased Count Dooku, as not only had Grievous failed in destroying Skywalker, but the survivors of the 4th Fleet had escaped with knowledge about the CIS superweapon which the Republic was so desperate to obtain. Still, Dooku had Grievous remain in command of the Malevolence and continue his chevauchée. Dooku then decided to consult with Darth Sidious on what to do now that the Republic had discovered their secret weapon. Grievous quickly departed the system and began to concentrate his attacks on medical convoys, striking them from the Rindelia system. Seeing an opportunity in this, Dooku ordered Grievous to attack the Khalida Shoals Medical Center, which was secretly located within the Rindelia system, information that Dooku had obtained from his master Sidious. With a successful strike on this station, not only would the Republic lose an important medical facility in the Outer Rim, but they would also lose the 60,000 clones convalescing there. Meanwhile, the Republic acted rapidly on the information provided by Plo Koon and the other survivors. The Jedi Council commissioned Skywalker and Plo Koon to hunt down and destroy the Malevolence. After a brief meeting discussing the likely whereabouts of Grievous, they rightly deduced that his next target would be the Khalida Shoals station, based on prior patterns. Coming to this conclusion, they set their plan in motion. Believing Grievous would make slow progress due to the nearby Khalida Nebula, Skywalker and Plo Koon took a bomber squadron from their force, codenamed Shadow Squadron, and planned to chart a shortcut located in the nebula known as the Balmorra Run, in order to reach the station and hold off Malevolence until Admiral Yularen and General Kenobi arrived with the main force. Grievous was made aware by Dooku that the Republic had sent a dedicated strike force under Skywalker to hunt him. Despite this information, Grievous, buoyed by his string of victories, was confident that he could take on anything the Republic sent. It was with this mindset that he arrived at the station, though it wasn't long before he was set upon in the rear by Shadow Squadron. Seeing the arriving threat, as well as the station deploying medical evacs, Grievous was not content with focusing on Skywalker and letting his primary targets on the station get away. He ordered an ion pulse which crippled a number of the fleeing vessels, while also wheeling the ship about to face the oncoming threat and deployed his own starfighters to slow them down. Skywalker and his force had no intention of letting the hyena droids accomplish their task, as Shadow Squadron blasted through them, driving towards the Malevolence. Their primary target was the bridge, where they determined Grievous was. With him gone, the chain of command would fall apart. Grievous released another ion pulse once he had faced broadside to Shadow Squadron, taking out half of the squadron and doing critical damage. The medical staff on station began lamenting that all hope had been lost. Skywalker, however, had not lost hope. He charged ahead, still taking casualties, as the many turrets of the Malevolence unleashed fire upon what remained of Shadow Squadron. It was at this critical moment that Plo Koon proposed a solution. Grievous had once more begun charging the gun, this time planning to unleash it upon the station, where its effect would be devastating. Plo Koon told Skywalker that they might have a chance of overloading it if they could target it before it fired. Seeing the merit in this, Skywalker directed the squadron to its new course and, with moments to spare, unleashed their payload on the portside ion disc. Grievous, unaware of where they had been struck, ordered the cannon fired immediately, overloading the cannon as Plo Koon had predicted, and causing a crippling explosion that destroyed both cannons along with many of the ship's systems, including the shields and the hyperdrive, thanks to the cannon's connection to the reactor as previously mentioned. Skywalker, now victorious, made his way to the station just as Master Kenobi arrived with the fleet. Kenobi, after congratulating Skywalker, took over for him and began to pursue the Malevolence. Though the ship was severely damaged, its sheer size made it nearly impossible to take down by firepower alone, though Kenobi's fleet persistently bombarded it in a relentless pursuit. Grievous would have a respite, however, as Dooku had arranged for a nearby senator, one Padme Amidala, to be rerouted towards his position. Grievous was to take the senator hostage, forcing the Jedi to hold their fire, thereby giving Grievous the time he needed to restore the hyperdrive and join a nearby Separatist fleet waiting to support him. They were able to capture the senator's ship, but this plan only ended up backfiring. The capture of the senator prompted Kenobi and Skywalker, who had now rejoined him, to infiltrate the Malevolence, where they not only rescued the senator, but sabotaged the ship's navicomputer. Grievous, believing that the hyperdrive had been restored, ordered the ship to rendezvous with Dooku, whilst he pursued the Jedi in his personal fighter in his bid to hunt them down, telling the flagship's crew that he'd rejoin them later. Acting diligently to execute his order, the droids set the ship in motion, only for it to promptly turn towards a nearby moon and crash into it, thanks to Skywalker's sabotage. The Malevolence, the prize ship of the CIS, had been destroyed. Though the ship was ultimately lost, it demonstrated great potential during its short service. This setback would not dampen the Separatists' belief in superweapons. Rather, the failure would be pinned on General Grievous, who was seen as a good warrior but a negligent admiral, and thus would be confined to ships of much smaller caliber for the majority of the war. The Republic, meanwhile, had found a victory, not just in that such a massive ship had been defeated by their forces, but also in the defeat of the previously invincible-seeming cyborg commander. The campaign of cat and mouse with the Malevolence was a major blow to the CIS's early ambitions, but battles of even greater scale and strategic importance were still to come as the Clone Wars raged on. But despite their recent failures, the CIS still hoped they could lure systems into the fold politically. One example of this came on the planet Rhodia, homeworld of the Rhodian species. Like many Outer Rim worlds, Rhodia had felt neglected by the Republic. Their supply ships had fallen prey to pirates, leaving much of the population starving. As a result, Senator Onaconda Farr withdrew from the Senate and made a deal with Viceroy Newt Gunray, who agreed to resupply and defend the world on behalf of the CIS. Senator Farr then lured Senator Padme Amidala, accompanied by Representative Jar Jar Binks, under the pretense of engaging in talks to ensure Rhodia's loyalty to the Republic. In reality, Farr was fulfilling another part of the deal with Gunray, that he would hand over Amidala to the CIS. She was captured by battle droids already present in the system, while Jar Jar managed to slip away into the aquatic terrain of the planet, given its similarity to his own home in the swamps of Naboo. Given his cloak, he was mistaken for a Jedi by Gunray and his forces. With the unexpected help of a local swamp monster, the Quazel Maw, drawn in and unleashed by droids attacking the grate upon which Jar Jar was standing, Jar Jar was able to free Padme right as she was about to be executed, despite Senator Farr's protests. Farr then assisted Amidala in arresting Gunray as a Republic fleet arrived in orbit, ending the Separatist occupation and temporarily capturing Gunray, though he would soon escape custody. Having lost their foothold on the Corellian Run with the capture of Geonosis and the defeat of their invasion force at Christophis, the Separatists were eager to re-establish access to the critical hyperlane, a goal the Republic was equally interested in stymieing. An opportunity arose as the Malevolence began harassing the Republic in the Mid-Rim. Though these attacks were primarily intended to test the new superweapon, this also likely served as a distraction for a new attempt to break into the Corellian Run, an effort which was now led by the head of the Techno-Union, Wat Tambor. Ryloth itself is not a planet rich in natural resources important for the war effort, like the crystals of Christophsis or the minerals of Shu-Torun. Its use was instead the potential for slave enterprises, using them to mine one plentiful natural resource Ryloth did have: spice. The Twi'leks found themselves more often than not in bondage, exacerbated by the constant political infighting and civil wars that plagued their society. Ryloth also had very little in terms of industry, at least compared to other planets, making defending themselves against those looking to exploit them nearly impossible. The Battle of Ryloth is something of a misnomer, as most of this universe's battles are, as it was a long campaign spanning months rather than a single set battle. Tambor led the planetary invasion himself, leaving Captain Ma Tuk in command of the blockade fleet. Given the state of the planetary defenses, the Separatists were easily able to establish a foothold on the planet, sending bombing runs to clear the way. Once they landed, they began to push to the major settlements. The defense of Ryloth was led by freedom fighter Cham Syndulla, who had become a rallying point for his people. He was soon joined by Jedi General Imogun Di, who arrived with a small relief force under Admiral Dao. These forces weren't going to be enough to stop the invasion, but it was hoped that they would be able to delay the enemy until a proper force could be sent. Time progressed with no reinforcements in sight, however, and the beleaguered defenders could only do so much. The forces on the planet were eventually cut off from orbital support as Admiral Dao's fleet was destroyed, and they were backed into the canyons of Ryloth. Di and his clones made a desperate last stand to allow Syndulla and the other Twi'leks to escape the encirclement through the canyon cave system. This cost Imogun Di and his troops their lives, but the Twi'leks would live to fight on. Aside from a trio of Pelter-class frigates bringing supplies to the Twi'leks the Republic could send no more, as even though they would score a victory at the Kalidan Nebula with the destruction of the Malevolence, the Republic was hard-pressed to cover every important front. The planet Khorm was on one such front, where Anakin Skywalker would eventually lead the Republic to victory. General Grievous soon reappeared after the Khalida embarrassment, attempting to restore his reputation by attacking the high-profile target of Kamino, the heart of the clone army. But his attack upon the Rishi Moon outpost, set up to help warn the crucial cloners of any encroachment, failed due to the exemplary performance of 3 clones. The Separatists had rigged the station to keep broadcasting an all-clear signal, which the clones managed to disable before sending a warning to the Republic. Their prompt response forced Grievous to retreat in the face of superior firepower. But worse things were coming from elsewhere, as Republic fleets were being ambushed and wiped out due to what the Republic deduced was a listening post that intercepted and decoded their messages. This was slowly eroding their presence in the Outer Rim, as the Separatists were taking advantage of the intercepted intel, helping them to establish blockades of the pro-Republic planets around the Rim. Skywalker was recalled and given a task force to go to the vital planet of Bothawi, as the Republic had learned Grievous was to assault that planet next. They had hopes of capturing the Supreme Commander and possibly learning the listening station's whereabouts in the process. Grievous ambushed Skywalker but was repulsed and escaped to the station. In what would turn out to be a stroke of luck for the Republic, Skywalker had lost his astromech R2-D2 during the fight. Grievous had captured it, bringing it to the secret listening post long sought by the Republic, known as Skytop Station. R2-D2 was able to broadcast a distress beacon, and Skywalker arrived at the station with a small force, recovering the droid and destroying the station, thereby ending the Separatist offensive in the region. Soon after, an engagement in the Quell system between a Separatist fleet consisting of at least 5 Munificents and Aayla Secura's fleet of at least 3 Venators, including her flagship Liberty, turned disastrous for the Republic. General Secura's forces were being overrun, but luckily General Skywalker and Admiral Yularen arrived in the Venator Resolute to assist. Unfortunately for the Republic, most of Aayla's force was unable to be salvaged. However, Skywalker and Tano undertook a rescue mission on Liberty to extract Aayla and whatever other forces they could. While covering the retreat from Liberty onto a Consular-class cruiser, Skywalker was knocked unconscious and severely injured. To make matters worse, when the Consular attempted to dock with Resolute, damage to the Consular's bridge by incoming Separatist fighters caused the hyperdrive to be activated, forcing the ship to pull away before the jump could occur. The ship emerged in the Meridian system, still out of control, and only quick action by Tano, Secura and their clones prevented the ship from flying into the star, instead crashing onto the planet's surface. The group beseeched the locals, a species called the Lurmen, to help the still unconscious Anakin, facing strong resistance from the pacifist Lurmen who feared their presence would lure in the Separatists, though the local chief, Tewot Ka, ultimately agreed to send his son, the village's healer Wag-2, to treat Anakin. Shortly after the Jedi's arrival in the village, a Separatist force landed on the planet under the command of General Lock Durd, who ordered his forces to ransack the village, searching for any signs of Republic weapons, unaware that the Jedi were present. Durd planned for this to be a test site for the next weapon developed by the CIS, the Defoliator. This was a powerful type of artillery, the shells from which would burn away all life in the massive impact zone, while leaving droids unharmed. The hiding Jedi witnessed the first test fire, where a large swath of the countryside near the Lurman village was destroyed, and Durd planned to test the weapon against the Lurman village itself soon after. The Jedi broke into Durd's compound and stole a Sheathipede-class shuttle, quickly flying back to the Lurman village to warn them, though Tewot Ka initially pushed back against their warnings. Undeterred by his protests, the Jedi and clones established a line of shield generators around the village. The shield successfully blocked the Defoliator's weapons, forcing Durd's first squad of droids and armored assault tanks to advance to the shield, where a recovered Skywalker, Tano and Secura, along with clone commanders Rex and Bly, were able to repel them. The second and third squads of droids proved to be too much for the Jedi defenses, successfully taking down several of the shield generators. This finally pushed many of the Lurmen, led by Wag-2, into action, helping the defense in the village itself, while Anakin rushed forward towards the Defoliator, successfully destroying it and apprehending Lock Durd before the village could be destroyed, putting an end to a weapon which, if deployed elsewhere, could have massively swung engagements in favor of the Separatist droid forces. Despite a setback in the Battle of Quell, which destroyed Isla Secura's battle group, the Republic had stabilized the front and sent a force to finally relieve Ryloth. At the vanguard of the Republic fleet, with the Venator-class ships Defender, Redeemer and Resolute, Skywalker was ordered to break the blockade of the planet to make way for the main force under Jedi Generals Kenobi and Windu aboard several Acclamator-class ships. Skywalker arrived at Ryloth to see the blockade, consisting of one Lucrehulk-class droid control ship, the Procurer, and two Munificent-class frigates under Captain Mard Tuk. He decided to give command of Blue Squadron to his Padawan Ahsoka Tano, having her make an attack run on the battleship while his force maintained their distance. Tano was able to advance and break their fighter line, but as she continued to the capital ships, 4 more Munificents emerged from hyperspace and deployed additional Vulture droid fighters. Admiral Yularen, aware of the danger, ordered Tano to return to the fleet, but she believed her squadron could still finish their assault. Yularen's fears would prove correct, as not only was her squad losing members, but the Vultures made their own runs on the Venators. Tano, eager to continue the offensive, eventually relented under Skywalker's persistent demands. Tano made it back to the Republic's ships as they prepared to retreat, but had lost most of her squad. Having failed to break the blockade, and with the Redeemer destroyed and the Defender heavily damaged, Skywalker informed Kenobi and Windu of their dire situation. They discussed postponing the invasion, but Skywalker reassured them that he would break the blockade by the time the landing force arrived. Skywalker ordered the Defender evacuated to his flagship, Resolute, as Defender was too badly damaged to fight again. After doing so, he took direct command of the Defender, leaving Captain Rex and Tano to command the Resolute as he put a daring plan to break the blockade into action. Skywalker arrived back at the blockade aboard Defender and started moving towards the Lucrehulk, opening comms and offering the surrender of himself and the ship should Tuk allow for humanitarian relief to Ryloth. This bought Skywalker time to close the distance, as Tuk considered and ultimately rejected the offer, taking extreme offense as scans showed Anakin was the only one aboard. But by this time, Tuk also realized the danger he was in. Anakin and the Defender intended to ram the Lucrehulk. He ordered the fleet to open fire on Defender, but the distance had already been closed, and Skywalker jettisoned to safety as the damaged Venator crashed into the battleship, destroying it. With the flagship destroyed and the chain of command interrupted, Tano arrived aboard the Resolute and charged the blockade before spinning the ship 90 degrees on its axis, turning its bridge away from the Separatist fleet. The droids, unsure of what to do without Captain Tuk, launched a full assault, with all Munificents closing in to attack what appears to be a vulnerable enemy. They were wrong. As the Munificents closed in, several fighter and bomber squadrons, led by Tano, hoping to redeem herself for her reckless actions earlier, launched from the dorsal hangar of the Resolute, protected by the ship's own mass from Separatist fire. They came around from under and above the ship and began peppering the CIS fleet, taking out ship after ship. This would come to be known as the Marg Sabel maneuver. Kenobi and Windu arrived just as they were finishing the fleet off, and requested permission to land, which Tano gave, beginning the liberation of Ryloth. They lowered into the atmosphere of the planet and quickly identified the city of Nabat as a suitable landing site to begin their operations. But the site was fortified by hundreds of droids, as well as several proton cannons that stopped the acclamators from approaching close enough to engage in orbital bombardment. Windu and Commander Pons took command of the fleet, while Kenobi and Commander Cody landed on the outskirts of the city with the troopers of Ghost Company, making their way into the city after overcoming the outer defenses. They discovered that the droids were using Twi'lek prisoners as living shields around the guns, so Kenobi determined that these would have to be rescued first. Though they had a difficult time initially, they eventually came upon a lone Twi'lek girl whom they rescued. She guided them to a tunnel system, which they used to sneak within the perimeter of the guns and commandeered one, turning it on the others, destroying them and freeing the prisoners. With the defensive cannons out of the way, Kenobi gave the go-ahead for Windu to land, as he and his company rallied with the Twi'leks and disposed of the remaining droids. With the landing zone now secure, the generals split their advance. Kenobi took his forces to secure the Jixuan desert as well as liberate any villages within range of this objective, while Windu took command of the 91st Mobile Recon Corps and marched towards the planet's capital of Lesu, where Tambor, the recently made Emir of Ryloth, was headquartered. The road to Lesu led through a cliffside road, which the Separatists used to their advantage, ambushing Windu with several AATs on the opposite side of the gorge from the road. blasting at his forces as they advanced and knocking out 3 of his ATTE walkers before Lightning Squadron could destroy them. Having traversed the last major obstacle to the city, the generals held a conference with Chancellor Palpatine and Ryloth's Senator Ornfrid Tar to give an update on their positions. Kenobi had secured the Jixuan Desert and, by extension, the southern hemisphere of the planet. Skywalker had routed what was left of the Separatist blockade, and the path to Lesu was open due to Tambor pulling the majority of his forces back to the capital. Taking Lesu, however, was easier said than done. The city was not only garrisoned by Tambor, but was itself a fortress situated on a rock within a seemingly bottomless chasm. The only way across was an energy bridge, which could only be controlled from the opposite side, and Windu was certain he couldn't take it with the forces available to him. To this end, Windu informed his allies of his decision to seek out Cham Syndulla, who could bolster his ranks enough to assault the city. Senator Tar objected on the grounds of Syndulla being a political rival, but Windu dismissed this and sought him out anyway. In Lesu, Tambor's tactical droid updated Dooku on the situation, leaving him displeased with the newly appointed Emir for having done a pitiful job protecting our investment on Ryloth, ordering him to plunder the valuables of the planet and evacuate before destroying the city and any villages he could reach with his hyena bombers, hoping to use the devastation to the CIS's political advantage to demonstrate the cost of a Republic victory. Windu eventually found Syndulla, but he was reluctant to assist, seeing aiding the Republic as trading one occupier for another. Commander Pond's report to Windu of the firebombing against civilian targets by the CIS led Syndulla to agree to meet with Tar and come to an agreement for the sake of their people. With Syndulla on Windu's side, he advanced on Lesu, while Skywalker was tasked with hunting down the bombers. This was complicated due to the reduced number of fighters available to him, having few left after the space battle. Windu and Syndulla were still not aware of how to cross the bridge and gain control of it, and Tambor had forced the residents of the city outside to deter his foes from firing. The answer soon revealed itself as Tambor's greed came to be his undoing. Even though he should have evacuated the city by now, he believed the Republic could never reach him within the city, and he refused to leave while there were still riches to be plundered from the planet. The last of the convoys filled with stolen goods was on its final approach to the city when Windu and 2 troopers boarded it. They were halfway across the bridge before they were detected by sensors, at which point they burst from cover. Syndulla ordered a charge towards the city as Windu utilized his force abilities to get his strike team safely the rest of the way across. Windu was able to hold the first city gate while the troopers made their way into the bridge power station, reactivating it and allowing for their forces to cross and attack in force, causing a general collapse of the Separatist defense. Tambor tried to flee, but his ship was stolen by his tactical droid and Windu took him into custody. Tambor believed they would both die, as CIS hyena bombers descended from above on the tactical droid's orders, but Skywalker and Tano arrived in time to destroy these, saving the city and ending the prolonged battle. With the loss of Ryloth and its Emir, the Separatists had once again been driven out of the Corellian-run hyperlane. The battle would serve as a blueprint for the Republic to capture future planets, as the success of Windu, using few clones and mostly native irregulars, would be replicated to capture worlds the Republic deemed of insufficient value to put their full resources into controlling. The battle was also a wake-up call to many, as its long, protracted nature would become a more than common occurrence before the war's end, and with the Battle of Ryloth bringing an end to the first year of the war, the outcome was far from certain. Though there were a great number of resources poured into the Ryloth campaign, there were other fronts which had even greater amounts of troops and strategic resources. One of these was the planet of Malastare, located within the Mid-Rim on the Hydian Way. The dog species inhabited this planet and had opted for a stance of neutrality, though it was one of the largest fuel producers in the galaxy and critical for the Republic to maintain its offensive capabilities. It was with this in mind that the Separatists made the planet a target early on in the war. We are not given an exact date for their campaign on the planet's commencement, though it most likely began sometime around the beginning of the Ryloth and Malevolence campaigns. Therefore, each campaign served as a diversion for the other, forcing the Republic to stretch its limited number of available troops, with Malastare probably being the primary target of the CIS, as we shall see later on. With the recent destruction of the Malevolence and the reclamation of Ryloth, the Republic would soon, without doubt, turn its attention to relieving Malastare, though the Separatists were determined to prevent this. One of their first plans to counter the Republic's attempt to relieve the planet was to effectively destroy the nearby planet of Naboo, which served as a strategic base of operations for the Republic. Its destruction would leave a large part of the Mid-Rim vulnerable to the CIS, especially if Malastare were taken as well. To do this, they would deploy another of their researched weapons, but unlike the technological terror of the Malevolence, this one was biochemical, a modified reintroduction of the Blue Shadow virus, a virus which had threatened the galaxy in the years before the Clone Wars. The virus was a waterborne pathogen capable of killing carbon-based lifeforms within a matter of 2 days. After it had killed an untold number of people, most likely in the millions if not billions before the Clone Wars, it was all but eradicated, though the cure for the disease was still unknown. Many believed there simply was none. In an example showing just how far the Separatist Council was willing to go to win the war, they contacted the Faust scientist Nuvo Vindi and tasked him with remaking the virus, hoping to weaponize it as the majority of their forces wouldn't suffer from the deployment of it on the battlefield, being droids. They especially hoped this would serve as an effective counter to the Jedi, as their presence on the battlefield had already demonstrated just how effectively they could turn the tide of entire battles. Vindi made his base secretly on Naboo, as its vast seas and oceans were perfect for the virus to thrive in. He eventually succeeded in reviving it, but would go further and bioengineered it so that it could be airborne, placing it into so-called viral bombs, which could be dropped on key worlds. Luckily for the Republic, Vindi had not hidden his base well, and the Naboo security alerted the Republic to its presence, allowing the Jedi to neutralize the operation. Another Separatist offensive was simultaneously taking place far on the other side of the galaxy, on the jungle world of Felucia. The planet, though not as advanced as some of its counterparts on the Palamian trade route, was valuable not only for its position on the hyperlane, but also for its rich abundance in Nissalin, a healing herb. Both the Republic and the Separatists had well understood its value and had placed garrisons on the planet early on, and they were now beginning to send dedicated forces to capture it. The Republic force was put on the defensive by the arrival of reinforcements led by General Grievous and Dooku's Sith assassin Asajj Ventress. Hoping to salvage the situation, the Jedi Council dispatched Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, now renowned across the galaxy for their military prowess. Upon their arrival, however, they found little they could do to change the outcome, as Republic forces were at the breaking point. They were at least saved from outright disaster due to the Jedi General's timely arrival, along with reinforcing detachments of the 501st and the 212th. Ventress, however, brought in significant reinforcements herself, including several munificent frigates that blockaded the world and cut off the Republic ground forces from their fleet above. Kenobi executed a delaying strategy of defensive actions and precision strikes to allow time for the Republic to hopefully break the blockade, though he realized the planet was lost. This proved the correct move, as Plo Koon soon arrived and broke the blockade, accompanied by the 104th Battalion. They began to extract their remaining forces off the planet, a process which became complicated by the insubordination of Ahsoka Tano, who disobeyed orders to disengage the enemy during a precision strike she was put in command of. Skywalker's timely arrival, rescuing her and her troops, prevented the risky move from turning into a disaster. The loss of Felucia set back the campaign within that sector for the Republic by weeks, denying them the planet's resources and position on the hyperlane. Despite repeated losses earlier in the war, the second-year opening seemed to be in favor of the CIS, as heavy Republic casualties were suffered along the northern and southern fronts. The Separatists had taken advantage of the weak garrison on Geonosis as well, and secretly returned to the planet, beginning to re-establish themselves there, closer to the Corellian Run, where so many of their ambitions had so far been quashed. Another situation, which started at the Jedi Temple with a raid by bounty hunter Cad Bane to steal a Jedi holocron, culminated at the Battle of Deveron, where Bane's fleet, which consisted of ships loaned by Newt Gunray, fought the Republic forces led by Skywalker, who were sent to capture Bane and free the Jedi Bola Rapal, who was being held prisoner by Bane. He successfully destroyed Bane's fleet, but failed to save Rapal or capture Bane himself. What's more, Bane had escaped with the holocron, which he forced Skywalker to open under threat of killing Ahsoka Tano. Luckily he was stopped, and the holocron was returned not long after. With the situation for the Republic devolving to this point, it is now that we return to Malastare, where the Separatists were on the cusp of another major victory. Though it is known as one of the longest and fiercest battles of the war, few records remain to tell of the battle itself. As we postulated at the beginning of this video, it most likely began sometime in the prior year, at the same time Ryloth was attacked and as the Malevolence still prowled the stars, and was perhaps even the primary target of the CIS. Republic clone forces probably took part in most of the battle, but it is likely that the native Dugs shouldered a fair part of the fighting as well. The Republic had agreed to prioritize the planet's defense in a deal negotiated with the leaders of the planet, in exchange for Malastare giving the Republic access to the planet's vast fuel reserves. At the same time, even with this arrangement, Republic troops came sparingly, while Separatist forces advanced using a strategy of overwhelming force. With the droid army forming outside of the capital, the final confrontation of the battle was soon to begin. The Republic forces consisted of clones and Dug warriors, with Jedi General Mace Windu leading his 91st Corps and in overall command. Reinforcing him was Jedi General Skywalker and his 501st Legion, who would make up the new front line. Their forces were supplemented with the standard ATTE as well as RX-200 Falchion-class assault tanks. The Dugs made up the second line and were primarily mounted cavaliers. These forces were supported by multiple pieces of artillery, such as debris loaders and railguns, all supported from the air by a small force of ARC-170 fighters and BTLB Y-wing bombers. The Separatist forces, meanwhile, had a similar composition, with B-1 and B-2 battle droids making up the vast majority of their ground troops, up to 20,000 in all, and were under the command of tactical battle droid TN-123. It should be said that the lack of a more renowned commander meant less importance was placed on the planet, but it could also be that since the Republic was targeting the Separatist leadership, they had hoped to divert attention to other sectors. Interspersed with the droids' battle lines were DSD-1 Dwarf Spider droids, LM-432 Crab droids, AAT tanks, NRN-99 tanks, and a complement of Hyena bombers and Vulture fighters. The battle commenced with a forward advance of the droid army. The Republic forces adopted a spread-out pattern, taking cover behind the many boulders and rock formations that dotted the plain below the capital. The Separatists soon came under heavy fire, as the Republic had been careful to clear the field of any obstructions beforehand, aside from what they used as cover themselves. So, to suppress this and soften the defences, the CIS released their Hyena bombers. These were effectively taken out by the ion rays of the Falchion tanks, which cut into them as they flew over the Republic's forces, unfortunately plummeting upon the Republic's front line as a result and knocking out some of their heavy equipment. The advance grinded on, and once they had closed the distance, the Separatists moved their Dwarf Spiders to the front, wreaking havoc on the Republic's lines. The Dugs Cavaliers advanced, hoping to destroy the Spider droids, but they were mown down in the attempt, and the survivors were recalled to the line. With the battle seemingly falling apart, the Republic sent the go-ahead for their bombers to deploy their secret weapon, the newly developed Electro-Proton Bomb. Though devices aimed at disabling mechanical beings or electronic equipment had existed for a long time, such as ion guns or the Malevolence's massive cannons, the bomb was of such destructive magnitude, its creator, Saunver Bol, said it could wipe out entire armies, all without harming organic beings. Though Doge Naka Urus, the leader of Malastare, was wary of the device, he was convinced to use it by Chancellor Palpatine, who was surveying the battle via hologram. The Republic's Y-wings left their base in the capital and climbed up whilst being screened for by squadrons of ARC-170s approaching from behind the palace. This had the intended effect, as the Separatists launched their Vulture droids to target the ARCs, which were lower to the ground, and were soon cut to pieces by the experienced and accurate artillery fire of the Dugs, paving the way for the Y-wings to deliver their payload. The bombs went off with an initial explosive shockwave that devastated the Separatist center. The following electronic blast all but annihilated their army, turning an all but certain victory into an utter defeat for the CIS, with no droid escaping and the few which survived being destroyed by the Dugs. The long battle was over, much to the relief of the Dugs, but with a sudden shake, the ground where the bomb impacted began to quake and eventually sink. A great hole began to open up, taking some Republic troops down into it. Forces were sent to recover these troops, which led to a horrifying discovery, as a great monster arose and its shrieking cries echoed over the rim of the sinkhole, striking terror into the Dugs, who identified it as a Zillo beast, a creature long thought hunted to extinction. With the emergence of the beast, the treaty between the Republic and Malastare was put on hold until the Dugs were sure it was dead, as their ancient animosity would not allow for it to live. While Doge Urus was preparing his plan to execute the trapped beast, he came to blows with Windu, who was just as adamant about keeping it alive. He saw it as innocent and hoped to transport it to a safe location off Malastare. This feud nearly broke the hard-won agreement for the Republic, but Skywalker had come up with a cunning plan. Urus had decided to flood the sinkhole with Malastare's fuel, as it was toxic to the beast. But just as Windu had predicted, this only drove the creature from the sinkhole, and it began ravaging the Darg encampment. Windu and Skywalker enacted the plan and began bombarding the beast with rays from their Falchion tank's ion cannons, which eventually brought the beast down, stunning it and allowing the Republic to move it to Coruscant, though the Dargs believed it to be dead. With that, the treaty was signed and the campaign for Malastare was concluded, reinvigorating a Republic becoming more and more used to the bitter taste of defeat in recent times. The Zillo beast would ultimately have to be killed, however, as it broke free from its new enclosure on Coruscant. With the front lines shifting back and forth across the galaxy as the Republic sought to retain its control of the major hyperlanes, it was impossible to keep a stable garrison on all worlds, at least without native support, as the Republic lost clones just as fast as it fielded them. Their Separatist enemies, conversely, had a seemingly unlimited supply of soldiers, so long as they still retained the Foundries from which to build them, relying on the strategies of overwhelming force. As anyone who has viewed our prior videos on this war knows, this second year had been fairly chaotic, to say the least, and with the increasing number of casualties, the Republic had to strip its garrisoning forces on several worlds to move troops into critical theatres for both defensive and offensive operations. One of these worlds was to be the desert planet of Geonosis, the site of the war's first battle, and it was also home to some of the largest droid foundries in the galaxy. Its capture by the Republic as the opening move of the war had been a great advantage, as it severely reduced the number of droids they had to face on the Corellian run, forcing the Separatists into many failed attempts to regain a foothold on the hyperlane. But with the Republic's attention elsewhere, Separatist task forces under the command of Poggle the Lesser, the Archduke of the planet, successfully infiltrated the planet and quietly knocked out the remaining Republic garrison. They were able to not only restore the Foundries, but also build new ones, all without catching the Republic's attention, as the native Geonosians built much of this underground. As things stood, it looked as if, in an ironic turn of fate, the Republic would be attacked with a surprise army from Geonosis. But fate would turn a different way, as within the Senate, a certain senator had caught the eye of the Jedi. Rush Clovis used to be the senator from Scipio, who represented the interests of the banking clan, and they, despite keeping a facade of neutrality as members of the Republic, were actually sided with the CIS, whom they supported with their substantial reserves of galactic credits. Thinking him to be a spy, the Jedi asked the senator of Naboo, Padme Amidala, to investigate him. She travelled with him on his diplomatic mission to Cato Nemoida, where she gathered data proving that he was indeed a traitor, and was working with Lot Dodd of Nemoida, the senator for the Trade Federation, and Poggle the Lesser to construct the aforementioned foundries on Geonosis. Dodd had realised she was there as a spy, taking information implicating the senators from the banking clan and Trade Federation, and poisoned her. He did this despite the protests of Clovis, who didn't believe she was spying until confronted with evidence that she'd been collecting data on them. She was able to escape with this information thanks to the help of Anakin Skywalker, who was posing as her pilot on the trip, and even some help from Clovis, who forced Dodd to provide an antidote. Once back in the Republic, she informed the Jedi, who were now alerted to the looming threat, and prepared an invasion force to recapture Geonosis and knock it out of the war once and for all. The task force would consist of two of their top generals, Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, and assisting them would be Jedi Masters Ki-Adi-Mundi and Luminara Unduli. As with nearly every engagement from this period, we aren't given the exact number of troops at their disposal, but it is likely that they had a fairly large amount, given their fleet was made up of 6 Venator-class Star Destroyers and 10 Acclamator-class cruisers. While it is speculated that the Separatists had more ground troops, as usual, it is likely the disposition of troops was fairly similar, given the Republic's broad offensive plan. The Republic didn't have to fight for space superiority, as the CIS had intentionally left the planet undefended in orbit, so as not to arouse suspicion. But once the CIS had discovered the invasion fleet and correctly guessed it was heading for Geonosis, they sent a quick response force of starfighters under General Grievous to distract them and possibly gather the ships necessary to muster a real defensive fleet. but this force was routed near the planet Dorin by General Skywalker and his Padawan Ahsoka Tano, who would rejoin the main fleet in time for the invasion. Poggle had prepared countermeasures should his presence on the planet be discovered, and had a large shield generator built within his main foundry that would protect the Geonosians' position from orbital bombardment. He had also built defensive emplacements on the boundaries of the shield to block any advance the Republic would have to make to attack his position. Having arrived in the planet's orbit, the Republic assessed the situation and indeed prepared for a ground assault aimed at knocking out the generator. They planned to send a few waves of bomber squadrons to soften up the outer defences, and instead of immediately advancing on foot, they would split up into a three-pronged assault of LAATI gunship groups carrying clone squadrons and ATTE walkers. The left would be under the command of Skywalker and Captain Rex, the centre under Kenobi and Commander Cody, and the right was under Mundi and Commander Jet. Unduli was left to command the troops held in reserve, and Admiral Wolf Yularen was in command of the fleet. The prongs would advance through the front line and make their way to a plain designated Point Rain, from there advancing in force in order to knock out the shield generator. With the bombers having made their run, the Republic launched their assault and soon ran into their first problems. Not long after arriving at the defensive perimeter, the Republic met with heavy resistance, as the bombers' run had done little damage to the Separatist lines. Mundi was forced to land outside of the perimeter and assaulted from the ground, whilst Skywalker's ships were all shot down within the perimeter, though he and a good portion of his men survived. They lost their ATTEs and were, like Mundi, forced to advance on foot within enemy-held territory. Only Kenobi's force was able to make it to Point Rain intact, though with Kenobi himself badly wounded. This left him isolated behind enemy lines, horrifically outnumbered and with no supporting ships. So he and Commander Cody formed a circle with their ATTEs and awaited for the other prongs to join them. Mundi successfully pushed through the perimeter and came to an area known as the Caltrop Field. They required air support to penetrate it, but Yularen informed them he was tied up dealing with the Separatist fighters and could not spare any. Seeing no other alternative, Mundi pushed forward his force and had his walker squads remain close behind. Eventually they were able to find a cave system that Mundi believed would lead them close to Point Rain. After entering, however, they were ambushed by Geonosian warriors. They suffered some losses, but were able to make it to the other side largely intact. Skywalker's force, meanwhile, had to navigate the canyons they had found themselves in, and though they had scouted this area before, they came upon a fortress wall that blocked their path. Seeing no other way forward but through the wall, they assaulted it. Unfortunately, they were pushed back on their first attempt. They assembled a strike team and finally were able to mount the wall and place charges on it, demolishing it and paving the way to rally with Mundi. Their advance, though tedious, was not hotly contested, as the main focus of the Separatists was Kenobi's force. They believed they had already repulsed the other two, led by Mundi and Skywalker, so they sent everything they had in reserve towards this central breach in their formation. Though Kenobi's force was holding them off, they were doing so only barely. Luckily, with Mundi and Skywalker regrouped, they were able to push forward and breach the Separatist encirclement. The shock of this attack, coupled with the now freed-up bomber squads under Yularen, sent the Separatists reeling. With them on the run, and with the generator brought into range of Kenobi's ATTEs, allowing it to be neutralized, they could now prepare their final assault. Kenobi and Mundi were taken off the field with the rest of the wounded, and the invasion was left in the hands of Skywalker and Unduli, along with their Padawans Ahsoka Tano and Barriss Offee, who were now preparing to assault their primary target, the main droid factory. It was currently the only operational factory, functioning at only 50% capacity. It is not known why the Republic did not just orbitally bombard the factory, but it could have been the case that they either believed it would be ineffective, given the majority of it was underground, or that they knew Poggle was within and wanted to capture him alive. Either way, it would have to be assaulted from the ground. Skywalker had planned a frontal assault, but was swayed to Unduli's plan of an infiltration mission consisting of both their Padawans, Tano and Offee. They were to sneak into the foundry via the catacombs that ran beneath it and find the foundry's reactor. Then they would strap a bomb to it, whilst their masters distracted the Separatists guarding it. While the Padawans began their infiltration, Skywalker and Unduli advanced upon the factory via the single bridge connected to the entrance. They successfully gained Poggle's attention, and he sent out all of his battle-ready droids in response, along with an assault by his Geonosian warriors from above. This desperate counterattack failed, and they were unable to repulse the Republic. It was only later, when they had completed their new super-heavy tanks, that they regained any ground, as their durability allowed them to advance despite heavy enemy fire, forcing back the Republic. Unfortunately, Poggle was alerted to the 2 Jedi Padawans within the reactor room as a fight broke out between the pair and his Geonosian forces who were guarding it. He rushed to the room, taking a super heavy tank, but in the ensuing fight, it turned out that Poggle had provided the Jedi with just the tool they needed. The Padawans were able to take control of the tank, and with their bomb having been stolen by the aforementioned guards, they used the tanks to detonate the reactor, destroying the Foundry. Luckily for the Padawans, the durability of the tank allowed them to weather the collapse of the building, and Skywalker was able to save them, though Poggle had already gotten away safely, eluding capture by the Republic, at least for now. After the destruction of the Foundry, the Separatist defense collapsed, as there was nowhere to establish a permanent HQ. So the Republic spent several days in mopping up operations, hitting and destroying other Foundries as well as Geonosian hives, while some squads were sent to locate Poggle. One of these was under Unduli, and she was able to track down Poggle to a crumbling temple before the Republic lost contact with her, fearing she was either lost or dead. Kenobi, now healed from his wounds, led a team that included Skywalker to find the lost Jedi Master, and upon entering the temple, found it and the catacombs beneath to be infested with undead, zombie-like Geonosian warriors. They battled their way through until they found their way to a Hive Queen's chamber, this one being named Karina the Great, and with her was not only Poggle, but a restrained Master Unduli. Karina revealed she had what was known as Geonosian brainworms, which could slip into beings, allowing the creatures and herself to control them. She planned to have Unduli, Kenobi and Skywalker under her control. But unfortunately for her, this would not come to pass, as the clones were able to take advantage of the environment and temporarily blind her with their headlights, setting off charges on the supports to her chamber, causing it to collapse with her inside as they escaped with a restrained Poggle, bringing the battle to a conclusive end and once again preventing the CIS from making use of Geonosis' factories, which had been one of their greatest assets in preparing for the war. The Second Battle of Geonosis ended with a Republic victory, just like the first, but now the Republic was thorough in their subjugation of the planet, making sure that such a crisis could never be repeated. The brainworms would make it off-world and cause an incident, but were eradicated by Tano and Ophi. Meanwhile, in the larger picture, the Separatists had yet again lost Geonosis and were pushed off the Corellian run. With their operations grounding to a halt, the Republic was determined to keep their momentum. As it stood by this point in the war, the Republic had earned far more victories than it had incurred defeats. The Separatists, however, had still managed to gain significant ground thanks to the numerical superiority of its forces, primarily in the Outer Rim, due to both the Republic focus on controlling major hyperlanes and the lack of allegiance Rimwood planets felt towards the Republic, which many felt ignored them. Seeing that the Separatists couldn't beat the Republic in the field, and the Republic couldn't be on all fronts at once, both sides decided to revisit a strategy each had tried before, that of targeting each other's command structure. Some may recall from viewing our previous videos that the Republic had adopted this strategy fairly early on, as they realized that they couldn't win via battle alone, and had made it a priority to target members of the CIS military command structure. Key targets under this strategy had included General Grievous, Count Dooku, and members of the Separatist Council. Though this was certainly a tall order to accomplish, we have seen its potential with the events of the Ryloth campaign during the latter half of 22 BBY, where the Republic had managed to successfully capture not only the leader of the Trade Federation, Newt Gunray, but also Count Dooku. The former was sprung by Dooku's acolyte Asajj Ventress while in transit to his prison cell, but Dooku himself was only able to break free by a lucky incident, proving to the Republic in their minds that this stratagem could indeed work, as their quarry had to be lucky and escape every time, whilst they only had to be lucky once. On the opposite side, the Separatists were looking on a broader scale. Taking out a few senators or a few generals wouldn't cause the Republic war effort to collapse like it would theirs. Despite the Republic's corruption, its strength lay in its institutional fortitude, or at least so it seemed, with each position being able to be filled by another person when necessary. So the CIS resorted to a familiar approach: psychological warfare. The Separatists set a bounty upon the head of every Jedi that existed. The higher in rank, the higher the payout. Bounty hunters across the galaxy would be lured in by the promise that they could become extremely wealthy very quickly by merely obtaining 1 or 2 Jedi, with the CIS only having to pay out if they were successful, a cost the Separatists found more than worthwhile. This would not only serve to neutralize the Jedi Order, but if successful, could tear at the morale of the Republic. If their symbolic and unbeatable defenders were made prisoners of the Confederacy, the general populace would demand peace. What's more, the Jedi had proven themselves to be able to turn sure defeats into decisive victories with their skills in the Force, making them the most valuable Republic military asset on top of their symbolic strength. Losing the Jedi, therefore, meant losing the support of the people and their greatest assets on the battlefield. The Republic would have no choice but to capitulate. While the Jedi Order certainly felt the effects of this new attack against them, it didn't work to the extent the CIS hoped. As sound as it was on paper, the fact of the matter is that the Jedi who were most vulnerable to these attacks were all in training on Coruscant in the Jedi Temple, or would at least be placed there following this bounty, while the ones that were out in the galaxy were fully trained Jedi, and most of them were by now also hardened war veterans. This means to the average bounty hunter, these people were far beyond their skill level to catch, and many dared not even try, thanks to the air of invincibility these warriors still projected. Though that doesn't mean none tried. One incident which occurred during this year involved the son of Jango Fett, a bounty hunter himself that some of you may recall was the template for the Clone Army. His death in the opening battle of the war left his son, Boba Fett, an orphan, and the fact that it was a Jedi who killed him embittered the boy to the Jedi. The younger Fett had by now taken what he had inherited from his father and followed in his father's footsteps as a bounty hunter, collecting around himself a group of ne'er-do-wells who set their sights on this lucrative bounty. Their main target was of personal significance to Fett, the Jedi High Council member Master Mace Windu, who had killed Jango at Geonosis. This, however, did not go well. Through a series of cunning attempts, Boba would come close to achieving his goal, but he never was quite able to capture the Jedi Master, only being able to occasionally pin him in place. Though he would go on to become one of the deadliest bounty hunters in galactic history, he was still but a boy, and by the end of this chase, he was himself captured by the Republic. The Republic's attempts on the CIS leadership fared little better, as being given that grain of hope with Gunray and Dooku's capture early in the war, however temporary, meant the Republic overlooked the flaws and obstacles of this strategy. Dooku had learned from the previous experience and rarely gave the Republic an opportunity like the one they'd had before, always under escort and always heavily guarded, delegating the frontline tasks onto Ventress and similarly formidable but expendable underlings. This meant that the Republic only had one realistic target, and it was one who relished his importance and infamy, General Grievous. The Jedi hunting cyborg general needed no bounty to pursue his foe, and he made it his priority to take out the Jedi Council himself. In this goal, he would prove his capabilities against the Jedi yet again, when he lured Jedi Master Eth Koth into captivity by baiting with attacks on important hyperlanes which had proven a priority for Republic defense, following up by suddenly attacking Koth's ship, the Venator-class Steadfast, which he overwhelmed with his heavy Recusant-class destroyer, quickly capturing the Jedi Master. The Jedi didn't have to wonder as to Koth's fate for long, as Grievous broadcast himself with his captive to the Jedi Temple, gloating of his victory and the Jedi's ineptitude, while also hoping to make them desperate enough to make more mistakes, which would allow him to take more Jedi captives. Unfortunately for Grievous, he underestimated the Jedi Master in his custody, and Koth was able to utilize silent hand signals to indicate that they were currently in the Seleucami system. Once the Jedi learned of this, they assembled a task force, not only to rescue Koth, but to once again attempt to capture Grievous. The Republic arrived in the Seleucami system with 3 Venator-class ships, 3 consular cruisers, and 1 Aquitens-class light cruiser, the Surrogator. Leading this force was Admiral Wolf Yularen aboard his Venator-class flagship, the Resolute, and General Kenobi aboard the Surrogator. Upon arrival, they found Grievous ready to meet them, as he seemed aware of their impending arrival and perhaps had even allowed Koth to leak their location. He positioned himself at the head of the formation in his heavy Recusant-class destroyer, and to his flanks and rear were 3 Munificent-class star frigates. Kenobi advanced ahead of the Republic forces in the Surrogator, accompanied by 3 consular cruisers, whilst the Venators slowly approached. Grievous, knowing his most hated foe Kenobi was aboard the Surrogator, did not destroy the ship, as he probably both ought to and could have, and instead assaulted the vessel until he was able to catch it in his tractor beam. He then began preparations to board the vessel. This, however, was quite an obvious trap, and not long after, Anakin Skywalker jumped out of hyperspace nearly right on top of Grievous's ship in his Eta-class shuttle, accompanied by Master Adi Gallia. The shuttle's size made it nearly undetectable in the mayhem around them, and they were easily able to sneak onto Grievous's ship. They began to make their way to Koth, whom they decided was most likely on the bridge. Grievous had expected this, and left some elite droids behind to deal with them, whilst he intended to capture or kill Kenobi. Though, as it would turn out, both of these plans would fail, as not only did the Jedi aboard his ship make short work of his trap, but Kenobi once more beat the general in a one-on-one duel, nearly resulting in Grievous's own death. With his prisoner rescued and his nemesis in pursuit, Grievous fled as he always did, though several clones and Gallia waylaid him. He managed to make his way to a C-9979 landing craft docked to his ship, and disembarked to escape. This too failed, as the Surrogator exploded, and the debris from it slammed into Grievous's craft, knocking it towards the planet of Selukami below. Kenobi left Anakin and Yularen to deal with the rest of Grievous's fleet, whilst he took their forces planetside to search for Grievous. Grievous was able to elude Kenobi for a while, thanks to his and his forces' utilization of the escape pods on the lander, which threw them far beyond the wreckage of their ship. However, their transmitters were damaged, meaning they couldn't call for help, and thus Grievous resolved to search for a working transmitter. He searched relentlessly, with droids dropping by the dozens due to their inability to stop and recharge. Captain Rex was dispatched with some speeders, and would have been able to report the location of Grievous if not for the intervention of a few droid snipers who were able to destroy his force. Though Rex himself survived, he would not reunite with Kenobi until the end of the hunt. Grievous finally found a transmitter and signaled for a rescue just in time, as Kenobi had managed to track him down. After a brief duel, Grievous managed to escape, abandoning what remained of his forces. This battle showed several of the difficulties inherent in these strategies, which would persist throughout the Clone Wars. Grievous, while he was a capable general, always gave in to his hatred and low opinion of the Jedi, and his need to personally beat them always continually put him at a tactical disadvantage that the Jedi would exploit. Underestimating the Jedi was a trap many Separatist officers would stumble into, as CIS propaganda painted the Jedi as relics of the past, inept at fighting a modern war. The Republic, meanwhile, gave far too much importance to the cyborg's capture. Though it would be a political and morale win, the loss of this asset would not be anything if Dooku remained at large, and any targeting of the leadership of the CIS would require Dooku to be removed if it could be expected to maintain any permanent effect. Regardless, they counted the events at Selukami as another near miss, and would chase the commander of the droids until the war's end. Though this was all according to plan for the one secretly pulling the strings on both sides of the war from center stage. Though we have so far covered many major events of the Clone Wars, we have yet to name all the participants. While the major players were certainly the Galactic Republic and the CIS, with the Hutts acting in their own interests on the fringes, there is one more belligerent. Or it is more apt to say, a bystander in this war, the Council of Neutral Systems. Though not as large as their counterparts by any means, the Council was made up of over 1,500 systems within the Republic. Many of them were important trading hubs, though sadly we don't know the entire makeup of this sub-faction. So whether they were more coherent or spread throughout the galaxy, what we do know, however, is that the Council and its members were fairly important, as their neutral standing drew the ire of both Republic and CIS, with each side looking for all the support they could muster, and saw them as spineless traitors. The leader of this council was the Duchess of Mandalore, Satine Kryze. Although Mandalore had a history of military expansion and sported a martial society in the past, the current regime had slowly tried to dismantle this following a devastating civil war. Satine was adamant about engaging in no further wars, and this brave stance had inspired other smaller systems, which had thus far feared the repercussions of neutrality, to follow suit and rally behind her banner. The repercussions those systems feared soon followed this principled stand. Their choice of not fighting caused resentment among their fellow systems who had taken a stance in the war, with some planets going so far as to stop trade altogether with them. This was more than some systems could take, as these planets relied on trade to sustain themselves. This could well have ended the Council almost before it began, had it not been for their supporters within the Republic, the pacifist faction led by Senator Amidala. This connection allowed those members in dire need to make pleas directed to either the Senate or specific senators with the backing of the members of Amidala's faction. Even this was only a small lifeline, and many would resort to using the black market. Given the state of affairs with the Republic's ever-improving footing in the war, Dooku decided to turn his attention to this tentative alliance. If he could bring them onto his side, that would strengthen the CIS position both strategically and perhaps even more importantly, politically, increasing the legitimacy of the CIS. But given the nature of this alliance, it was unlikely he could get the majority of the systems on board. So instead, he opted to use them to further destabilize the Republic. Not all of Mandalore followed along with Satine's idea of a new Mandalore. Some reminisced fondly about their brutal past and were proud of the reputation Mandalore garnered as warriors without equals. Though there may have been other groups within the Mandalorians with this same mindset, the only one we know of, and the one which Dooku had an interest in, was Death Watch, a terrorist organization which stood in opposition to Duchess Satine. Dooku and Death Watch's leader Pre Vizsla conspired not only to free Mandalore of Satine's rule, but also to bring it into the fold with the CIS, though it is not known if Vizsla only saw Dooku's support as a means to an end or truly wished to support the Separatists. Either way, Death Watch soon struck, first targeting a Republic cruiser and then spreading rumours of Mandalore's government sympathising with the CIS, undermining their standing with the Republic. This drew the intended result, as now there was talk in the Senate of military occupation of the planet. Before any such plans were set into motion, however, the Jedi Council sent Master Obi-Wan Kenobi to investigate the situation. An ideal choice, not only for his skills as a negotiator, but also for his strong personal connection with Duchess Satine. Kenobi found that Mandalore had no involvement in the recent attacks, and was by and large a peaceful planet. He was also able to uncover Death Watch as the culprit after a brief investigation in which he and Satine were incarcerated on the moon of Concordia, where Pre Vizsla, the leader of Death Watch, was ruling as governor. They were able to escape back to Mandalore, and Kenobi agreed to escort the Duchess to Coruscant to plead her case before the Senate. Taking her ship, the Coronet, Kenobi rallied with Jedi General Skywalker and made way for Coruscant. But even this trip had its problems, as another one of Death Watch's members, Senator Tal Merrick, was also on board and attempted to assassinate Satine, first with assassin probes, then CIS battle droids which boarded her ship, and then by threat of simply blowing the ship up. He was ultimately slain by Skywalker, and the Duchess made it safely to Coruscant. The arrival of the battle droids had made it clear to the Jedi that Death Watch had the backing of the CIS, but all was not clear within the Senate. Indeed, more intrigue was to follow. As Satine pled her case, she was shown a holomessage delivered by her Deputy Minister Jarek, in which he decried Satine's policies as failing Mandalore and pled for a Republic intervention. This new evidence further spurred the Senate towards a military occupation of the planet, and eventually led to Satine's arrest. But luckily for her, she had friends in not only the Jedi, but also the pacifist faction of the Senate, both of whom were able to uncover Jarek's original message, which praised Satine's policies and spoke of a bright future for Mandalore whilst denouncing the Death Watch as mere terrorists. This was enough to cool the hot heads in the Senate and quell the ideas of a military occupation. This was a great victory for the neutral systems, though troubles would still lie ahead for them in this uncertain war. There's a dearth of information about military campaigns in this period, though it seems that a lull in fighting may have set in since the Second Battle of Geonosis. Most likely, a front line had been established, as after this point there is no mention of any large-scale offensive operations deep into either side, as there was with the Malevolence campaign earlier on, for example. At this time, the events on the planet of Geonosis took place, hinting that large-scale operations were being bogged down. We do have mention of some activity along the Hydian Way hyperlane, which involved the Republic reinforcing their fleet there in order to counter General Grievous, though as we may see later, it could have been a ploy by the CIS to throw off the Republic from their actual target. Even though the attempt to attack Kamino the prior year had failed to even reach the planet, it was still a high priority target for the CIS. With the war effort currently going nowhere, Dooku decided that now was the time to once again attack the homeworld of the clones. Logically, it would have been sound for the Republic to have either moved the cloning facilities off Kamino, given its proximity to the front lines, or to simply build more cloning facilities on other worlds around their territory to maximize their production. It is possible that the Republic tried this, and we simply don't know about it. But in the end, it was the Kaminoans' will that won out, as their pride in their abilities, as well as their greedy pockets, wouldn't allow them to let anyone copy their trade, though they were willing to allow the Republic to send personnel to oversee the clones' training. Due to this, Kamino was one of the most heavily guarded of the Republic's planets, with an entire fleet dedicated to it. Though we do not know its designated name, it most likely consisted of around 5 to 8 Venator-class Star Destroyers, as well as presumably including other supporting ships, truly a large force. This strong defense clearly indicates why the CIS hadn't made regular attacks on the planet, but given the respite in the fighting elsewhere, or perhaps a slow build-up, they were confident in attacking once more. The CIS fleet consisted of 1 Providence-class battleship helmed by the cyborg General Grievous, 3 Lucrehulk-class battleships, 11 Munificent-class star frigates, and 3 Recusant-class light destroyers. Accompanying him as his second-in-command was the Sith assassin Asajj Ventress. This second attempt, however, would also not go according to plan, as the Republic intercepted a transmission between Grievous and Ventress discussing their planned offensive against the planet. Given the infamy of their opposition, the Republic recalled Generals Kenobi and Skywalker from their current missions to reinforce the garrison, currently under the command of Jedi Master Shaak Ti. This in total brought the Republic forces to 10 Venator-class Star Destroyers, 2 Acclamator-class assault ships, 2 Aquitens-class light cruisers, and Skywalker's command of the 501st Legion to reinforce the garrison. Kamino, being a world entirely enveloped by its oceans, made it such that all of its cities were built upon long supports connected to the ocean floor. The number of these so-called stilt cities is unknown. Suffice to say, a ground assault on this planet was inarguably harder than most other planets, and would require absolute air control. It was with this in mind that the Republic's strategy rested on winning the space battle, as they prepared minimal ground defenses, although the cities were put on alert with central command at the capital of Tipoca City. Grievous arrived with his seemingly massive fleet and deployed in the Echo 3 pattern. This pattern had all ships take defensive positions around the flagship, a move that very much suited Grievous's reputation for self-preservation, and thusly he began his assault. What was unusual, however, were 2 things pointed out by Shaak Ti and Kenobi respectively: the number of ships he brought and the recklessness of the assault. Even though one could say the CIS total ships outnumbered the Republic's, their quality was a different story, as the majority of their fleet were munificents, which could hardly go toe-to-toe with the Venator. Secondly, even though naval warfare wasn't Grievous's strong suit, this attack reeked of blind aggression, something the cunning cyborg very rarely indulged in. Nevertheless, the battle had been initiated. Grievous had his fleet attack in a spearhead, aimed towards the center of the Republic line, which was in a manipular pattern. This had the ships create gaps in between themselves that allowed the line behind the first to fire. With the CIS closing in, Skywalker deployed alongside the other starfighter squadrons, with himself leading Shadow Squadron. We presume the Republic had a larger number of starfighters, given they were able to invade and dominate the CIS formation with relative ease, and soon the CIS began to lose ships, with chunks of debris falling off and plummeting to the planet below. Though the battle was going in the Republic's favor, not all was as it seemed. Kenobi suspected a trap, as he told Skywalker to not press the attack, an order which Skywalker contested. Kenobi was soon proven to be right in his fears, as he went to investigate the debris that had fallen around Tipoca City from the battle above. He discovered large numbers of aquadroids assembling numerous Trident-class assault ships, which had arrived on the debris. Kenobi was attacked, but managed to escape and return to Tipoca, while the Tridents began their assault on the city. Commanding this assault was the mysteriously absent Ventress, who had arrived upon Kamino days before and was hiding in the sea below the city, where she had waited for Grievous to deliver the deconstructed ships for her aquadroids to rebuild. Thanks to their built-in drills, the Tridents were able to penetrate the city at multiple levels, which caused widespread confusion amongst the garrison force. After boarding, the droids deployed and began to push the hastily scrambled clones back into the city. Kenobi recalled Skywalker from the fleet front as the Republic forces had finally come to realize the true battle was unexpectedly developing on the ground. After reuniting, they both surmised that the number of droids was insufficient to take the city, and that their real goal was to capture the DNA template of Jango Fett housed within the city. This was indeed the case. Given that the template was used for all the Republic clones, the CIS hoped to capture it and unlock its secrets, hoping to find genetic flaws they could use against the Republic, a particularly concerning possibility given their past attempts to create bioweapons. This task was entrusted to Ventress herself, so she made her way to the room which housed the templates, whilst Grievous, who had arrived on one of the disassembled ships, took command of the battle. Knowing they had to act fast, Kenobi went to personally deal with Grievous, while Skywalker made his way to the template chamber where he found Ventress, having already obtained the DNA capsule. While both Jedi engaged in protracted duels with their targets, the droid's offensive was beginning to grind down. Surprise had been the primary fuel for the success of their assault, not numbers, and now that the surprise was beginning to wear off, and the clones assembled in force, the tide began to turn, just as the droids reached the command center. Having been continually advancing, the droids were spread thin, and when the clones began to counterattack, the droids quickly folded, quickly being pushed back to their ships. By this time, the Republic's specialized troopers, such as those of the Rancor Battalion, were showing up, and began to destroy the ships themselves, which plummeted to the very waves they had emerged from, though this time they weren't going to come back up. Skywalker succeeded in retrieving the DNA capsule from Ventress with the help of members from his 501st before she could escape, and Kenobi was able to prevent Grievous from causing more damage by chasing him away from the front line, though neither of the Jedi was able to prevent the two from escaping. Though with their flight, the fight for the planet was over. The Battle of Kamino, also known as the Battle of Tipoca City, would be the last time the CIS would attempt to attack the clone homeworld. Having failed in both the objective to capture the DNA template and the objective of causing damage enough to hinder the production of clones, the faith Dooku had for both his agents diminished greatly, and he became hesitant to deploy them in such operations for the duration of the war. The CIS would find a morale boost from the fact that they were able to assault the capital city directly. It was a rather hollow source of pride, but one they needed to cling to, given the string of recent defeats. Although the number of vessels, droids, and organic troopers had increased to a point higher than any before in the war, the front lines were still deadlocked. Though not explicitly stated in any of our records, we can infer this from the events that we will soon recount, as well as the lack of any significant events for the remainder of 21 BBY and the early part of 20 BBY. Both sides had found steady footing and were now jostling for control in the systems they still contested. What each side needed was something to tip the balance. The Republic sought to accomplish this by crippling the CIS command structure, as well as attempting further military offensives. At the same time, the CIS hoped to do so by bringing more systems into the fold politically and eroding support for the Republic. One such event involved Pantora, the moon of Autoplutonia, and a member of the Republic. The CIS had tried in early 21 BBY to force the Pantorans to join them by invading Autoplutonia, but were driven back by the Pantorans and their newfound allies, the Tal species. That was the past, however, and given they could not spare military resources for a renewed invasion, the CIS opted for blockading the planet. Utilizing the Trade Federation's legal status of neutrality, they blockaded the planet under the guise of collecting financial debt. Meanwhile, Dooku offered to provide aid if Pantora would join the CIS. However, Baron Notlewisi Papanoida, chairman of the planet, saw through this ploy and petitioned the Republic for aid. This would lead to a fiasco similar to the one Dooku employed to try and gain the Hutt's allegiance by kidnapping Rot of the Hutt, only this time kidnapping Papanoida's daughters. But thanks to the ingenuity of Papanoida, Pantora's Senator Chuchi and her friend Ahsoka Tano were able to rescue his daughters and bring the whole affair to an end. The Republic, meanwhile, was still divided in its efforts. One mode of thought, which was pushed by the faction supporting an escalation of the war, was increased production of clones and further budget cuts in favor of redirecting those funds to military expenses. One such bill, presented by Senator Sam of the Techno Union, would deregulate the banks and allow for the purchasing of a great number of clones. Senator Organa of Alderaan, part of Amidala's peace faction, was able to successfully table the bill, however, much to the war faction's consternation. Due to a law made before the war, which forbade members of the Republic from entering into talks with members of the CIS, no headway had been made to resolve the war diplomatically. Padme Amidala, the senator of Naboo and leader of the peace faction, knew that if the bill passed, the war would drag on indefinitely. Hence, she decided to utilize a loophole in the law and sought out her old friend Mina Bonteri. Formerly a fellow senator within the Republic, Bonteri now was a senator of the CIS, representing the Jabrail sector. With the help of her Jedi friend Ahsoka Tano, the two were able to make their way to Raxus, the capital of the CIS, and speak with Bonteri. Though she was a loyal Separatist, she agreed that peace was the best way forward, but was not optimistic on the prospects of Amidala's plan, which would have her persuade the Separatist parliament to send a peace proposal to Chancellor Palpatine, calling for talks to end the war. Bonteri nevertheless made her plea in the CIS Senate, and being a skilled orator, she swayed the majority of the parliament onto her side. In the final vote, it was agreed a peace proposal would be sent to the Chancellor. Amidala's long-sought goal was becoming a reality. If talks could be initiated, it would be a victory for not only herself but the galaxy at large. This hope did not apply to everyone, however. These few depended on the war to continue, and were willing to go to great lengths to prolong it. Dooku, who had presided over the very meeting where the proposal was accepted, was among those who did not desire the war to end. If it did, everything his hidden master planned would be for naught. Luckily for him, his greedy pawns in the Republic Senate also did not want this, namely the aforementioned senator of the Techno-Union, as well as senators Nix Card and Lot Dodd of the Banking Clan and Trade Federation respectively. Though they were CIS sympathizers, their true reason was avarice. If the war continued, both the Trade Federation and Techno-Union would continue to profit immensely via droid production, shipbuilding, and weapon trading, while the Banking Clan was the main source of loans procured by the two belligerents. To this end, Dooku planned to put an end to Amidala's interference and make sure both sides saw peace as an impossibility. As Amidala returned to Coruscant to hopefully push the Senate in the direction of accepting the peace offer, Dooku authorized Grievous to conduct an assault on the capital, in which he sent an elite team of droids to target the planet's power grid, which was a success. This renewed CIS offensive undermined the sincerity of the Separatist Senate's proposal. With Dodd and Sam pretending to be outraged, they were able to make the rest of their fellow senators feel similarly, and thus they rejected the offer outright. Coinciding with this, Dooku staged an unspecified attack on one of the Confederacy's worlds, in which Bonteri was killed, blaming the Republic for the terrorist attack, and withdrawing the proposal with the backing of the Parliament. Another proposal was issued not long after this failed peace attempt, this time by the Senator of Kamino, Hali Batoni, which proposed an emergency appropriation bill, which would have the Republic purchase 5 million more clones. Amidala and her Senate allies fought hard to have it defeated, though eventually Batoni won out, as Dooku used the opportunity to stoke further fear within the Republic by hiring a pair of bounty hunters to assassinate the senators of Rhodia and Umbara, scaring the Senate into passing the resolution and undermining any attempt to de-escalate the war. As the CIS tried to pull the strings from behind the scenes, the Republic went on the offensive militarily. At Sullust, on the Rimmer trade route, Kenobi and Skywalker were able to corner Asajj Ventress and her fleet. Though we aren't told how this engagement came about, it is probable, given the superiority in ships held by the Republic, that Ventress was the one attacked, probably en route to somewhere as she called reinforcements during the battle. This proved futile, however, as Dooku betrayed her late in the battle, recalling her reinforcements. The victory went to the Republic, with Ventress presumed dead after the destruction of her flagship. A development would soon occur that would bring both sides to fight sooner rather than later, as Jedi Master Even Peel would discover the legendary Nexus route. The Nexus route was considered merely a rumor, a route that cut deep from the Inner Rim to the Outer Rim, and had junctions along both the Polemian and Corellian trade routes. If this route existed, it would be a great advantage to the side that controlled it, possibly even being able to upset the balance of power in the war. Both sides had committed forces to scout out hidden routes once stalemate ensued on the hyperlanes, but neither had made any significant discoveries until now. With this in mind, Peel hurried back to Coruscant, relaying his discovery to the High Council, though not the coordinates, for fear of the message being intercepted. Whether the CIS encountered this message or a spy leaked the information, they soon discovered Peel had this critical intel, and immediately sent a task force to assail his ship. They successfully cornered him en route and captured both him and his crew under Captain Wilhoff Tarkin and brought them all to Lola Sayu and incarcerated them in the infamous prison formerly held by the Jedi. The Citadel was a near impregnable fortress built to hold Force users. The operation to reclaim it had been put aside for more pressing matters, but needless to say, it was now top priority to free Peel. So they gave the mission to Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, who were to lead a small group to infiltrate the Citadel, free Peel and whoever else they could, and rendezvous with the Venator group under Jedi Master Plo Koon that was on standby to retrieve them. They were to infiltrate the planet with the use of a captured CIS ship, piloted by 3 reprogrammed B-1 battle droids, commanded by R2-D2, and the clever use of carbonite freezing, having their entire team frozen to hide under the CIS detectors before being awoken once they landed on the planet. As they did not land at the docks, they knew they had little time before they were to arouse suspicion, so they quickly made their way to the Citadel. The Jedi were able to enter, but not without setting off the alarm, which caused the prison to go on full alert. Despite this, they managed to stealthily navigate to Peel's cell and free him. They intended to leave, but learned that Peel had split half of the coordinates with Captain Tarkin, which made his rescue a priority as well. Though they encountered further traps, the team was able to rescue Tarkin as well, but were stopped from commandeering an escape ship as planned. The Jedi contacted Plo Koon to come and extract them, while on the run to avoid CIS patrols looking for them. They were able to survive long enough for the rescue to arrive, and launch an assault that diverted the CIS forces long enough for Plo Koon to personally make a breach in their line and rescue the team. Unfortunately, Peel died in the final skirmish, but not before passing his coordinates to Skywalker's Padawan Ahsoka Tano. Peel's death would not have gone in vain, as the coordinates made it to Coruscant, but Tarkin refused to give his over to the Jedi, proclaiming his allegiance to the Republic alone, and the information went to the Chancellor. Though the Jedi would try to obtain the other half of the coordinates, they were never given it, and the Nexus route would presumably never be used. The Republic then made plans to attack the key world of Felucia. It is probable they relocated their forces from the Sullust front to this assault, given Skywalker was present for this new battle. We aren't told of any naval engagement before the ground battle. It may be there was a light naval force defending it, but it is more likely the CIS was being outpaced in space vessel production, given the Republic held most of the major shipyards, and from here onward the Republic grows more aggressive, while the CIS uses their craft more defensively. That is, however, conjecture on our part, and we suggest you take it with a grain of salt. The Republic's forces were able to establish a foothold on the planet by taking over a CIS base, but they weren't able to drive the CIS off the world. Indeed, this conflict would grind on until the end of the war, though we aren't given details on the battle between their capture of the base and the betrayal of Jedi Knight Aayla Secura by her clone troopers at the very end of the war. This is another example of how drawn out some of the battles had come to be. Decisive campaigns, which were won in days, weeks, or even months, were becoming more and more rare. As such, cover operations and proxy wars became the mode with which both sides hoped to tip the scales. It is with this in mind we now turn to the world of Dak, though to the wider galaxy it was known as Mon Cala. Mon Cala was a unique planet on the galactic stage. It was a water planet like Kamino, but while the latter utilized nearly nothing of their native world's natural environment, the former embraced it, building cities above and below the waves. The natives of this planet were the Mon Calamari and the Quarren, and both existed in relative peace, if not necessarily harmony, on the planet, building a society that was codependent on the other, and was recognized by the galaxy as an autonomous planet similar to Coruscant. Though the world held a cultural significance for its arts, it was their ships that gave them their true acclaim, as Mon Cala cruisers were all unique, a form of art unto themselves, not to mention quite powerful, with the Mon Calamari themselves having a very long and proud history of interstellar exploration. However, even the most beautiful of paintings has flaws, and so it was with Mon Cala. They and the Quarren attempted to live as equals on the planet, but it was never truly equal. Most of their cultural heritage belonged to the Mon Calamari, and indeed the Mon Calamari represented the planet in most matters, as the ruler of the planet was a Mon Calamari monarch. With this in mind, it was no wonder the Quarren felt themselves held as inferiors of the partnership, a fact which had occasionally led to open conflict, albeit one thought settled centuries in the past. Before the Clone Wars, there was a consecutive number of Mon Cala senators in the Republic that were Quarren. This may have been intentional to placate the Quarren. One of these senators, Tykes, held pro-Separatist sympathies and saw the plight of the planets aligned to the Separatist movement to be a mirror to that of his people. He would be one of the first to declare for secession and was a founding member of the CIS. Tykes' position, however, was not universally held among the Quarren, as many of them merely wanted more representation rather than an outright monopoly on the planet. And so the Mon Cala Council quickly replaced him with another Quarren senator, but the damage had been done, as a divide similar to the Republic now fractured the denizens of Dak. Several Quarren shipbuilders had left the planet to join the CIS under the leadership of Tykes, forming the Free Dak Volunteers Engineering Corps, working with the nearby shipyards on Pamant to build such vessels as the Providence-class carrier-destroyer. The planet of Mon Cala itself, despite these fractures and departures, was stable for the majority of the war, until the murder of Yos Collina, the king of Dak. This sparked a crisis upon the planet, as many considered his heir too young to rule. The chieftain of the Quarren, Nosari, proposed himself as candidate to the throne, but this was dismissed out of hand by the Mon Calamari for both traditional and political purposes, given Nosor's role as leader of the Quarren Isolation League, the movement started by Tykes. The Republic sent Senator Amidala as ambassador to mediate the dispute, with Skywalker accompanying as protection. Upon arriving, however, they discovered the CIS had also sent an ambassador, Riff Tamson. He was sent to Mon Cala as an observer, but his true intentions were to bring the planet into the CIS, as he was the one who had murdered King Collina, though no one knew this, and he backed the Quarren while slandering the Mon Calamari as egregious overlords. This would have the intended effect, as the Quarren soon left the capital and ceased communications with the Mon Calamari. A battle looked imminent, so Skywalker informed the Republic of the situation and called for reinforcements, which were dispatched under the command of Captain Rex, Kit Fisto, and Ahsoka Tano, though with the situation so uncertain, they knew not if they would arrive in time. The Quarren had their reinforcements in the form of aquadroids, which were supplied to them by the CIS, and these soon amassed outside the capital alongside the Quarren forces, while the Mon Calamari soldiers prepared their defences under Prince Li Cha and Captain Gil Akbar. They waited until Tamson, openly leading the Separatist forces, finally gave the order to attack. The Battle of Mon Cala then began. Under a hail of fire, Tamson's forces charged forward to close the gap, as the Quarren's area of expertise was in melee. The aquadroids provided the firepower they needed to reach their enemies' lines, and once they reached the outskirts of the city, Akbar had his melee fighters surge out, and a bitter battle ensued. Given the time span, it is likely both forces never truly reached the full potential size of their army, but the belligerents still fielded considerable forces. The Quarren soon began to gain ground. This was halted by the arrival of the Republic reinforcements, scuba clones, specially trained to fight in aquatic environments. They joined the battle and gave the Mon Calamari the edge they needed to force Tamson to retreat. The fight was won, but they gathered their wounded and prepared their defences again. It was doubtless that they would attack once more, as the droids began amassing in the coral below. Tamson soon returned, knowing time was not his ally, as he could not allow his foe to assemble more manpower, or for the Republic to send a dedicated task force. He set once more upon the capital, this time bringing heavier equipment. These were probably being held in reserve during the prior attempt, as he estimated he could win the battle without their use, but given his foe was reinforced, he unleashed these now into the Battle of the Ocean. These were the Hydroid Medusa, an invention from Tamson's native world of Kakaris. Half monster, half machine, they held the appearance of cyborg jellyfish. Though this may sound amusing to us, they were terrible on the battlefield, given their cybernetic enhancements. Tamson had them mass in the center, and they led the assault upon the city, while the Quarren and aquadroids assaulted from the flanks. Given that Akbar had no heavy equipment to counter, he could only try his best as the hydroids closed in and began electrocuting his soldiers. Akbar's flanks became overwhelmed, and the situation started to deteriorate even more rapidly with the arrival of the Trident-class assault ships Tamson also had at his disposal. With their front line all but destroyed, the Jedi took what remaining forces they had and fled into the caves below the capital, handing the city over to Tamson and the Quarrens. With the city under their control, Nosori expected this to be a change of government in his and the Quarrens' favour, but these ideas were soon dispelled, as Tamson and Dooku began to dictate the direction of the planet. with the Separatist leadership enslaving the defeated Mon Calamari and moving them into camps below the capital, though they knew as long as Prince Li Cha was free, the conflict could not be resolved. The prince himself, meanwhile, was still hiding in the caves, moving from place to place to avoid detection. They tried to escape via Amidala's ship, but it was rigged with explosives and set as a trap for the prince, though this attempt on his life failed. With nothing left, they contacted the Jedi Council and informed them of their desperate situation. The Republic did not have forces to spare, nor more troops that specialized in subaquatic warfare, and so the war effort looks to be lost. Kenobi, unwilling to admit defeat just yet, suggested they appeal to the Gungans for aid, as they lived primarily underwater and were experts at such warfare. This was accepted, and the Gungans agreed to send a portion of their Grand Army to assist Li Cha. In preparation, the Jedi targeted sonar and tracking installations around the capital, which alerted Tamsin to the incoming danger, though he could do nothing but wait for the attack, and soon the Gungan army arrived. The Mon Calamari survivors attacked precisely when the Gungans arrived. The formidability of the Gungans forced the Quarrens and Droids back. The plan was for the two Republic allied forces to link up and drive towards the city, but Tamsin knew this could not be allowed to happen. Thinking quickly, he sent his Trident ships towards both battle sites and had them create vortexes in the water. This wreaked havoc on both sides, as they threw everyone around and about, destroying any battle lines, but this turned the tide, as Tamsin now sent his reserves, which quickly captured those trapped in the vortex. Only Tano and the prince were able to escape. The battle seemed well and truly over, as the Republic had no more men to spare, and even the Jedi had been captured. Soon they were able to capture Li Cha as well, who pleaded with Nosor to join him against Tamsin. This plea was not answered, and Tamsin prepared a public execution for the prince. All were expecting for this battle to be an utter defeat for the Republic, but fittingly for the ocean world, one more tide was left to turn. Nosor Ri had started this war not with a hatred for the Mon Calamari, but because he felt his people were not being heard. His fellow Quarren felt likewise, and given the rising number of CIS troops getting involved and the brutality of these troops, they became aware of the devil they had entreated. Equally revealing was Tamsin's declaration of himself as ruling governor of Mon Cala, and its admission into the CIS, leaving neither the Mon Calamari nor Quarren in charge of their own world. At the execution of Li Cha, Nosor Ri had one of his men inform Akbar that the Quarren were on his side, and at a given signal, they freed Li Cha and all their prisoners, and together, both groups set upon the droids. Tamsin fled and gathered his forces as quickly as he could. A fight broke out once more in the capital, though this time, Tamsin had no more tricks, and soon his forces were overwhelmed by the now united locals. In the ensuing rout, Tamsin was personally killed by the prince, ending the battle. Li Cha was then crowned King of Mon Cala, with the backing of all of the natives of the planet. The CIS, primarily Tamsin, had played their hand too heavily, and would never again have the chance to bring Mon Cala onto their side. This, though, was but one of many such civil wars that raged across the galaxy, and there were many more planets with internal strife for them to exploit. The unshakable confidence with which the CIS had entered into the war was beginning to wane, as the vast numbers of droids that made up their forces required equally large resources to maintain or replace, and by 20 BBY, these resources were in short supply. In the earlier part of the war, the CIS had made it a priority to target major hyperspace lanes to secure both them and the planetary resources along them. A combination of both luck and the unexpected professionalism of the clones stymied these attempts. This was done while the Grand Army of the Republic was barely over 300,000 troops. Now that the army was well in the millions, with many hardened veterans, they could not only defend their territory in its entirety, but could also commit fully to offensives. There was now a time limit for the CIS, as they could only hope to turn the tide by gathering more allies, as the stalemate was beginning to break in favor of their adversaries. But this we know only as retrospective viewers. The contemporary observer wouldn't have noticed the change. Indeed, many systems which had declared neutrality originally had begun to shift towards joining the CIS due to Dooku's persuasion skills and the increasing hostility and authoritarianism of the Republic. Dooku knew, however, that these smaller planets meant nothing in the grand scheme of things, as they provided little if any benefit to the wider conflict. With the Republic advancing on important planets like Felucia, and gaining ground in the stalemate on Salukami, with the former being close to the CIS capital on Raxus Secundus, Dooku needed planets that were either rich materially, with massive industrial capacity, or which were strategically well positioned. Dooku had, as we discussed previously, attempted to bring Mon Cala alongside their cause, which would grant them access to exquisite starships, but this failed, and with this attempt foiled, he decided to try and seize a target at the heart of the Republic, politically if not geographically, the paradise world of Naboo, home of the Republic's Chancellor and one of its star senators, Padme Amidala. Attentive viewers will know this planet well by now, as it has featured previously in this video, but for those unaware, Naboo is located within the Mid-Rim. It was an idyllic planet, originally of interest for its plasma, although this was not of particular interest to either belligerent. It did not sit upon any of the major hyper routes directly, but it was well positioned on a trade route directly between the major Hydian Way and the Corellian-run hyperlanes. It was also within a short distance of major worlds like Sullust, Eriadu and Malastare along the Rimmer. These three mineral-rich, heavily industrialized planets being within striking distance of Naboo helped make it a desirable target for those who did not possess it. Dooku also had political reasons to take the planet, as the war found its roots here with the blockade by the Trade Federation a decade before, and as was mentioned, it was home to Senator Padme Amidala, who was also the leader of the peace faction within the Republic Senate. Luckily for Dooku, there was corruption throughout the galaxy. All he had to do was find those greedy enough to work with him. To this end, he solicited the aid of Rish Lu, a Gungan who sat upon the High Gungan Council as a minister. Lu was a Gungan mystic who used his abilities to benefit other Gungans, similar to the position a priest or other holy man may hold in other societies more familiar to us. Lu convinced the boss of Otto Gunga, Leonie, to wear a necklace that slowly hypnotized him over time, until he was fully under Lu's control. With Lu pulling the strings, he started slowly having Leonie give speeches denouncing the Naboo, which is what they called the planet's human inhabitants, as foreign occupiers and oppressors who had dragged them into conflict after conflict that the Gungans had no reason to take part in. Though the Gungans held a favourable view towards the Naboo, as both had fostered a very healthy relationship after the Trade Federation's blockade, many still held fresh the events of the Mon Cala Civil War, where many of their comrades had been slain on a world very far from the waters of their homeworld, in a battle which had very nearly been a disaster. Utilizing this brief rise of cynicism, Lu was able to successfully sour the relationship between the species and had Leonie make calls for war, beginning to assemble the Gungan Grand Army. Hearing rumors regarding these events, the Republic sent Senator Amidala and Jedi General Skywalker to court Leonie and discover the murky details behind these events. Not long after arriving, Skywalker sensed the source of Leonie's odd behavior and freed him from Lu's control. However, when they went to confront him, a fight broke out between them and Lu's hidden droids, which resulted in the wounding of Leonie and the escape of Lu. Leonie fell into a coma because of these injuries. As a result, no one could call off the Gungan attack, but disaster was averted thanks to quick thinking on Skywalker's part, as he recognized the similar characteristics Senator Binks had with Leonie. Binks quickly donned Leonie's robes and was taken to the army's assembly area, where they found Lu demanding the commencement of the attack, using Leonie's supposed death as the provocation for it. This was thwarted by Binks acting as Leonie, calling for general demobilization and denouncing Lu as the source of the conflict, which caused Lu to flee with Skywalker in pursuit. This unfortunately did not put an end to events on the planet. Soon enough, both Dooku and Grievous arrived, with the former making headquarters in Lu's secret laboratory. Grievous meanwhile landed at the assembly point and learned that the Gungan army had cancelled their attack on Theed, the capital of Naboo. He demanded to see Boss Leonie to discover why. Binks was able to fool the general and delay him, while the Gungan general Ruth Tarpals secretly depowered his droids. By the time Grievous had discovered the deception, it was too late, and he was forced to take on the Gungan army by himself. He was subsequently captured, though at the cost of the life of General Tarpals, who engaged him in a duel, sacrificing himself to give Binks the opening shot to fully disarm the cyborg of his lightsabers. The capture of General Grievous should have been a major achievement, and would have deprived the CIS of its only successful commander in a time when it desperately needed them. Instead, the Sith played their shadowy hand yet again, as Dooku utilized Skywalker's pursuit of Lu to set a trap for him, in which he too was captured. With both sides now having a hostage, a prisoner exchange was agreed upon, and this unique opportunity was undone. The CIS was denied an important planet yet again, and the Republic lost a great opportunity in the release of Grievous, which no doubt was discussed at length in the time following. The CIS would be given another chance at an important world not long after, as intrigue within the Republic arose yet again, as it so often did. With the front becoming stabilized, the military faction of the Senate called for a troop increase bill. This ran contrary to another bill championed by the Peace faction, which wanted to reduce military spending, seeing the stabilization of the border as proof that enough had been spent. The champions of these bills were Senators Medici of Umbara and Padme Amidala of Naboo, respectively, both fighting on the floor and behind closed doors for their respective bills. This newest jostle between the factions would abruptly end, however, with the deaths of the Senator of Rhodia, Onaconda Farr, and Medici himself, both of which were soon linked to the Senator of Kamino, Halibut Tony. She was vindicated when it was discovered to be Farr's aide who had murdered both of them for political reasons. This worked in favour of the deceased Dici's bill, as the military faction often got its way in the wake of such brutal displays of the war's potential dangers. Dici's death also catalysed Umbara's secession from the Republic, and their joining the CIS. It is unclear how far apart these two events were. Records indicate Dici was assassinated in late 21 BBY, while military operations on the planet were well past mid-20 BBY. Whenever this secession happened, we can surmise the Republic didn't take long to respond, as Umbara was invaluable to the Republic war effort, being that it was rich in dunium, a resource important for constructing starships. More importantly, it shared a space lane with Kashyyyk, an invaluable planet for the Republic that was already threatened by the surrounding CIS-aligned planets, and Umbara's addition to Separatist territory nearly cut it off entirely from the Republic. All of these factors thrust reclaiming the planet to the top of the Republic's priority list. Put in command of retaking the planet were Generals Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker. Alongside them would be Jedi Masters Pong Krell and Saesee Tiin, both accomplished strategists serving as detachment commanders. The Republic would field Kenobi's 7th Sky Corps in force, as well as Skywalker's 501st Legion, which would be transported on 3 Acclamator-class assault ships and 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers. The CIS didn't field any ground forces of their own, probably because they couldn't spare them. The Umbaran's own highly advanced technology seemed to be sufficient to hold the planet, in the eyes of the CIS and Umbarans themselves. The Republic seemingly agreed, as they committed the full might of the 7th Sky Corps and the 501st to combat them. Whatever the reason for their lack of presence planetside, the CIS could not allow this vital planet to fall back into Republic control, so they sent a naval detachment which was made up of 4 Providence-class dreadnoughts, 16 Munificent-class frigates, and 3 Recusant-class light destroyers, a truly formidable force. To take the planet, the generals planned to attack the largest and most important city, which was also its capital. There is no record of its name, so we shall continue to call it the capital. This was of course easier said than done, as the planet of Umbara's natural environment would be a problem to tackle in itself. Nicknamed the Shadow World, light did not reach the surface, making it a dark place, only lit by the bioluminescent animals and flora which called it home, and which were also highly aggressive and predatory in their own right. The plan called for a multi-pronged assault, with landings conducted to the north, south and east of the capital. The city had an outlying defensive line that was connected by several positions. These were to be assaulted via the east by detachments of the 7th Sky Corps led by Krell and Tiin. The southern advance was to be the main thrust led by General Kenobi and the majority of the Corps. To throw off the Umbaran defenders and hopefully weaken the other fronts, Skywalker was to be deployed north of the city and advance on it. We have only sparse details of the southern advance and the eastern assault, as our primary accounts come from the northern assault. As such, we shall focus on that and fill in the others with what we know. Given the strength of the CIS naval force, there was never any intention on the Republic's part of contesting them in space, though this would change later as naval reinforcements were promised. Instead, they had their Venators quickly breach the blockade and allowed their Acclamators to swiftly run through the gap to deploy to the surface, while covered by fighter wings led by Commanders Ahsoka Tano and Barriss Offee. All landing zones were heavily contested, with many of the Republic's LAAT gunships being knocked out of the sky by the many Umbaran hover tanks waiting below. This had been expected, and so Skywalker had his ATRTs deployed, which soon overwhelmed the Umbaran line thanks to the Walker's speed and the low rate of fire of the tanks. Then they began pushing toward the city, but they found their advance had been intentionally lightly contested. The Umbarans soon set upon them as they crossed a ridge, but were eventually driven back by a bomber run. The Umbaran defenders would soon return, however, and began to harass Skywalker's force so badly he didn't have time to set up camp. Instead, they just continued their push towards the city. At some point, Skywalker received a summons from Chancellor Palpatine to come to Coruscant. Skywalker was reluctant to do this, but left anyway, as the invasion was progressing well, and it seemed they could spare him. Both Tien and Krell had taken on the eastern defensive line and united their forces. With this, Tien was given command of both detachments, while Krell was reassigned to command the 501st in Skywalker's absence. Though Krell had a string of victories to his name, he was infamous amongst the clones as he held little regard for their lives and prioritized objectives above all else, making him a terrible fit for the independent-minded members of Skywalker's command, creating a hostile atmosphere he intentionally fostered. The clones' fears with their new commander were soon proven well-founded, as Krell ordered the 501st along the main road to the capital, which Captain Rex was opposed to as he knew it would be easily defensible to the Umbarans, and as such thought a side route would be safer. Krell scoffed at this. He said time was of the essence in war, and delaying the advance for safety was a cowardly choice. This angered the clones, and that anger was further reinforced when they were proven correct. Their vanguard was ambushed on the road, and was barely extracted by the rest of the Legion. Krell was furious that Rex had ordered a retreat in the face of the enemy, but before the two could butt heads, a message came in from Kenobi. His and Tien's assault had been stalled, as the capital, though nearly cut off from the outside, was being resupplied via a newly discovered airbase west of the city. Given its hidden location, the 501st was in a prime position to assault it, as the Umbarans facing them were positioned to defend the approaches to the city. With these new orders, Krell redirected the 501st to swiftly attack the airbase. As they advanced, they soon came upon a thin gorge that blocked their advance. Rex wanted to go around, as moving through the gorge would pull the clones too thin, but Krell ordered they advance via the gorge regardless of the risks. By this point, the clones were on the verge of mutiny, and were only held together thanks to Rex's leadership. With them uniting behind their captain, they advanced through the gorge. Moving in 3 groups, they eventually came under assault by several Umbaran crawler tanks. These monstrous centipede-like machines nearly destroyed the advancing units, but quick thinking by the clones saved the day, and they destroyed their attackers. This would only be the start, as upon reaching the outskirts of the base, they were set upon by Umbaran mobile heavy cannons. These were far more formidable than the crawlers, and were impervious to the clones' weapons. Knowing they could not destroy the cannons, and that retreat through the narrow gorge they had been forced to advance through wasn't an option, Rex ordered 2 clones to infiltrate the airbase and commandeer some Umbaran fighters. This was a success, and not only saved the operation, but led to the capture of the airbase, and with the airbase in the Republic's hands, the capital was now completely cut off. The Umbarans were working on borrowed time. While they did have a CIS supply ship in orbit to resupply them, this was only a temporary solution, so retaking the airbase was crucial. The Umbarans repeatedly assaulted the airbase, but were repulsed every time. Long-range missiles supplied from the orbital supply ship were stalling the Republic's southern advance, which was being directed towards the airbase as well. Kenobi informed Krell of the situation, and Krell proposed to link up with Kenobi before transmissions were cut off. Krell ordered the 501st to be prepared to assault the city within 12 hours. The clones were strongly opposed to this, as it would put them in the firing range of the missiles and almost certainly get them all killed. As usual, Krell ignored these concerns, and he also denied a request from the clones to utilize the captured Umbaran starfighters to assault the supply ship. The clones at this point were fed up with Krell, deciding to go ahead with their own plan. They were able to successfully infiltrate the supply ship and destroy it, though this came at the cost of one of their lives. Krell was furious and ordered the survivors of the mission executed. The clones disobeyed yet again, but before anything could escalate further, they were informed that the Umbarans were attacking, and this time in captured clone armor. Putting aside their differences, the clones took positions to repel the assault, and met the Umbarans in the field, only to quickly discover these were not Umbarans, but were clones of the 212th Attack Battalion. The 212th reported they were reinforcing the airbase, and were told they would encounter Umbarans in captured armor. The one who reported this turned out to be Krell. All reservations were thrown aside, and members of the 212th and 501st confronted Krell, ordering him to surrender. He put up a fight, but was eventually captured and summarily executed by the enraged clones. Krell had become disillusioned by the war, and hoped that by intentionally sabotaging the Republic's plans, Count Dooku would take him on as his apprentice, though this is a laughable thought. Now fully cut off, and without hope of resupply, the capital quickly fell to the Republic forces, thanks to a spearhead assault led by General Kenobi. With the capital fallen, the CIS Navy soon withdrew, leaving the planet and the system in the Republic's hands once more. The brutality of the conflict left a deep scar on all involved, with Krell's betrayal deeply affecting both the clones and the Jedi Order, showing just how much the still escalating war was getting to all of them. Though the Battle of Umbara was over, its repercussions were only beginning to be felt. The Republic was demonstrating its full might, as they maintained the front lines while suppressing a full planetary insurrection on Umbara. This was particularly impressive, given that the Umbarans were feared for their technological and military prowess. The CIS were now more aware than ever that the scales were tipping in the Republic's favor, as they were steadily regaining worlds back into their fold. In light of this, both sides became open to diplomatic talks once again. This was most likely thanks to the Separatist parliament, as the majority of the Republic Senate was still galvanized towards continuing the war, due to the perceived hostility of the CIS, a result of Dooku's intentional efforts to undermine prior peace talks. Nonetheless, they were ushered to acceptance by the peace faction, and so both sides met for a conference upon the neutral planet of Mandalore, with Senators Amidala, Organa and Mothma representing the Republic, and Senators Atal, Fonti and Lawise representing the CIS. While this could have been a landmark moment, with hindsight we know this conference was certain to fail from the start. The Republic delegates were restricted on certain items, one of them being the recognition of the CIS as an official state, and this was the first thing Senator Atal brought up as a prerequisite to any further discussion. Though this is conjecture on our part, it is possible that Dooku had sent Atal there intentionally, knowing her confrontational nature, and with her being the leader of the Parliament's pro-war faction, it was likely that she would not be willing to compromise. The discussions were deadlocked from the beginning, and it was further soured with the arrival of Lux Bonteri, son of the late Senator Mina Bonteri, who decried Dooku as a traitor and the mastermind behind his mother's death. After this, things quickly broke down further, and the conference ended prematurely. That wasn't to be the end of the diplomatic moves in the galaxy, however. Senator Kupat Roshti of the Togruta colony world of Kiros requested aid from the Jedi Council as a CIS force of some number made way for them. The Jedi promptly answered, but upon the arrival of the force, led by Jedi Generals Kenobi and Skywalker, instead of colonists, all they found were battle droids and a Zagarian named Darth Dinar demanding their surrender. Dinar planted bombs throughout the colony and threatened to detonate them should they not comply. Kenobi utilized his quick thinking and challenged Dinar to a Zagarian duel. As the duel was underway, Skywalker and his Padawan Ahsoka Tano searched for and successfully disarmed the bombs. With these out of the way, Kenobi quickly dropped his ruse, and they were able to capture Dinar, who revealed the missing colonists had been taken to Zagaria. This was alarming for the Jedi Council, as not only were they on Zagaria, but they were to be sold at an official royal auction. Such a thing hadn't happened for millennia, and signaled not only the re-emergence of the Zagarian slave empire, but also slavery in the galaxy outside of Hutt space. Before the auction, the Jedi Council dispatched a small force to find and hopefully free the Togrutans, consisting of Kenobi, Skywalker, Tano, Captain Rex, and R2-D2. The group was able to infiltrate the palace on Zagaria and locate Roshti, but they were captured not long after and enslaved by the Zagarians. Thankfully, as luck would have it, they would be freed thanks to Dooku's meddling, as he insisted that the Queen of Zagaria, Mirage Sintel, execute the Jedi. She refused, leading to her being killed by Dooku, but not before Sintel revealed the location of the Togurtans to Skywalker, whom she held as a personal slave. With this, he linked up with Ahsoka and contacted the Republic for assistance. They were able to free the rest of their team along with the colonists before destroying the slave facility and fleeing the system. The Zagarian hopes of resurrecting the slave trade were dashed for the foreseeable future, thanks in part to the power struggle which ensued on Zagaria after the Queen's demise. Suffice to say, they were well out of the fight. Another situation was beginning to develop, and this one would be far more detrimental to the CIS than any blow currently struck by the Republic. We shall now turn our attention to the jungle planet of Onderon. Onderon was a primarily human-inhabited planet, and it possessed very little strategic importance, as its location lay only on the minor Lesser Lantillian route, rather than any of the galaxy's primary hyperlanes. Likewise, it had what could be considered normal resource levels, but nothing that would be of critical importance to the greater picture for either side, hence why neither side had made a substantial bid for it until now. The CIS took control of the planet in the early stages of the conflict in a coup that placed the pro-separatist candidate Sanjay Resh on the throne, and imprisoned the previous king Ramses Dendup, who had vowed to remain neutral within the confines of the royal palace. Though successful in its immediate goals, the change in leadership was not well received, as Dendup was a popular ruler, and Rash's takeover heavily relied on the droid army loaned to him by the CIS. A rebel cell in favour of the reinstallment of Dendup did arise, and throughout the war they harassed the droids wherever they could, until hopefully they would find an opportunity to liberate their planet. Their perseverance would eventually pay dividends, as in late 20 BBY, the juggernaut that was the Grand Army of the Republic held the momentum, and was beginning to put a considerable strain on the droid army. Likely bolstered by the nearby events on Umbara, the rebels made contact with the Jedi Council, requesting aid in their fight to liberate their planet. The Council, while sympathetic to their cause, could not spare them manpower to fight the war on Onderon. What's more, they did not want to be seen as insurgency supporters. Skywalker came up with a plan that required little Republic involvement, but could still help liberate the planet, as the rebels did not lack the stomach for the fight nor the manpower. All they needed was training and the equipment. Though they were still hesitant, they gave Skywalker the go-ahead to try this new strategy. Skywalker made for Onderon, accompanied by Tano, Rex and Kenobi. The team landed on the planet and was able to quickly make contact with the rebels, who were being led by the Guerrera siblings Saw and Steela. In their company was also the rogue senator of Onderon, Lux Bonteri. The Jedi advisory team quickly got to work training the rebel cell, including instruction on the different types of droids used by the CIS and their various capabilities. After a short time, however, they were attacked by a droid squadron that was sweeping the area, having detected the unregistered ship that had dropped off Skywalker's team. Their newfound skills were put to the test, and they passed with flying colors, having destroyed the squadron with minimal help from the Jedi. With the Jedi having taught the insurgents the required skills and having passed their trial by fire, the real test was to begin, and so they headed out of the jungle to infiltrate the city of Aziz, the capital of Onderon, where they would set their new plans in motion. Once inside, the rebels began to harass the local droid garrison. They were highly successful in attacking and then blending back into the crowd. The droids had no way of countering them, and this began to affect Rash's standing, though he could do little to stop them. Seeing that the rebels were doing well, Skywalker and Kenobi decided to depart and report their progress to the Council. They advised the rebels to aim for higher-level targets, as merely attacking droids would only mark them as terrorists in the eyes of the people. They needed to make clear to the people what they were fighting for. Having given their final advice, the majority of the party left, although Commander Tano remained to observe and advise them. After debating their next course of action, the rebels decided to attack the power facility within Aziz. Without it, the droids would be put in a very precarious position, as would Rash himself. This would not be easy, however, as the important installation was heavily guarded by the droids and fortifications, including large walls, with a heavily reinforced entrance. The rebels decided to commandeer an AA tank and use it to break through the gate and destroy the main generator. Waiting until nightfall, they attacked a droid patrol, picking them off slowly, intentionally giving the droids enough time to call in for reinforcements. Soon enough, their prize arrived. They were able to successfully capture it, and they quickly made way for the facility before the droids realized they had a tank missing. The fight was brief, and the rebels were nearly overcome by the droid commandos that were put on guard there, but the rebels emerged victorious and destroyed the generator. This served as the signal for all their comrades around the capital to attack any droids within reach. Though we aren't given numbers, this attack was likely severely damaging to the garrison, as not long after, Rash requested Dooku for reinforcements, which he granted, and he would also send a general to command them given Rash's ineptitude. In the aftermath of the attack, a wave of support followed for the rebels. The people who had once feared them, or at least doubted their ability to make a real impact, now supported them, with some even joining and swelling their ranks. As their size had become fairly large, they decided to elect an official leader. Given her level-headedness and her actions during the operation, the group nearly unanimously elected Steela. She accepted her role in stride and continued the attacks on the droids with renewed vigor, as well as making it clear through recorded holograms that the goal of the insurgents was the restoration of King Dendup. Meanwhile, their opposition had not been idle. Though Rash had no reasonable plan to deal with the rebels, the newly arrived super tactical droid Kalani, sent by Count Dooku, believed he did. With the rebels now fully allying themselves with the cause of restoring Dendup Rash, Kalani planned a public execution for the deposed king on the grounds of inciting insurrection. This was an obvious trap, but given what was at stake, they had no choice but to act. Saw acted prematurely, against the advice of Steela, and tried to rescue Dendup before the execution, only for himself to be captured and the next day marched to the execution grounds in front of the palace alongside Dendup. Just as the execution was about to commence, the rebels pounced. They were able to storm the stage and free both Dendup and Saw, but were cornered as they tried to make their escape and were forced to surrender. Though this appears to be the end, an unexpected development saved them in the form of the commander of the Royal Army, General Tandin, who arrived with a squad of soldiers and held Rash at spear point. The rebels and his soldiers were able to make their escape thanks to him, and Tano intervened to save Tandin himself as well. They all escaped, safely fleeing the city with the king. The rebels fled eastward towards the highlands and set up a base there, where they began to broadcast messages of Dendup embracing the rebels as liberators and inspiring the people to revolt. The situation was now nearly untenable for Rash, as the droids not only had to contend with the rebels, but also the Royal Army and the revolting populace, who began openly denouncing him in the streets and attacking droids with impunity. Kalani understood that the only way to reverse the situation was to find and kill Dendup. Without him, the uprising would lack its unifying figure, and as such, it was the droid army's prime directive to locate the rebel base, a process which would not take long. The rebels, now buoyed by the success and at their strongest numerically, sought to end the droid occupation once and for all. Saw hoped to put the capital under siege and force the CIS out, no doubt with the knowledge that the inhabitants were on their side. Steela, who was now named overall commander of Dendup's forces, disagreed with this plan, as she did not want to put the civilian population at risk, probably believing the CIS would use them as meat shields, hostages, or worse, strike at them in retaliation. To this end, she sought to bring the CIS to them, fully knowing that time was not their ally. She made it blatantly clear their position was somewhere in the east of the city. This plan worked, and soon Kalani dispatched nearly the entirety of the droid army to face them. It would be all or nothing for both sides, and the battle to decide the fate of Onderon, the Battle of the Highlands, was set to begin. There are no numbers given to the strength of each side's forces, but the makeup of Rash's army was likely typical of most droid armies. However, it could be argued that it was rather outdated, given it had very little in the way of heavy equipment, outside of troop transports and AATs, much like forces fielded by the CIS at the start of the war. Dendup's force had no vehicles whatsoever, but they made up for this by utilizing trained ground and aerial mounts, Onderon's traditional and iconic Beastmasters, as well as LMGs and stationary field guns. When combined with their knowledge of the terrain, these were all going to have a deadly effect. The droids approached in column form, with the front made up of the regular B-1 battle droids, followed by the B-2 super battle droids. In between each formation were placed their vehicles, and not long after entering the Highlands, they were set upon by the Onderonians, who poured a murderous fire upon them from their predetermined positions. This was exacerbated by their complete control of the air, as well as being able to knock out the enemy's vehicles and swoop down upon the front. This advantage was soon overturned, as the droids released their secret weapon in the form of several HMP gunships. These ships had advanced ray shields, which weren't able to be penetrated by anything in the Onderonian arsenal, and so their front line began to crumble under their onslaught, pressing them back and knocking the Beastmasters out of the sky, reversing the rebels' former total control of the airspace. Tano contacted Kenobi and Skywalker and informed them of the situation, asking for assistance from the Republic, as they could no longer hide their backing anyways, thanks to Tano's prior intervention. Kenobi denied her request, stating the whole point of this operation was to train them, and for them and them alone to overcome the obstacles. Otherwise, the Jedi plan to limit the Republic's involvement would come to naught. Having said that, she told her to provide what assistance she could, and if the situation looked too grim for them, she was to extricate herself from the planet. She accepted and returned to the fight. Skywalker, however, disagreed and tried to persuade Kenobi to reconsider, but he would not, reiterating that the purpose of the mission was to minimize Republic involvement. This gave Skywalker an idea, which Kenobi did consent to, and so he sent a message to Tano telling her to wait for assistance. Meanwhile, Dendup's forces were struggling to maintain their position under the assault of the gunships. They managed to delay the enemy long enough to receive Skywalker's promised help. This came in the form of a ship, out of which stepped the famed pirate Hondo Ohnaka, along with a gift of several rocket launchers, bought and paid for by Skywalker and Kenobi. Though one could question the morality of this under-the-table arms dealing, the Onderonians did not. Their base was soon attacked, most likely because the CIS forces had spotted Hondo's ship. After dispatching these scouts, the rebels at the base quickly made for the front line, where their beleaguered forces were fighting to the last. Saw was the first to shoot one of their new rockets, taking out a gunship on his first hit. With these in hand, they began to turn the tide as more and more gunships fell. The Onderonians fully regrouped and began to push the droids from the highlands, though one tragedy remained in store for the freedom fighters. In their chase of the droids, a chance came for the droids to strike Dendup's HQ. Dispatching a sole gunship alongside several commando droids, they set upon the base and would have killed Dendup if not for the timely intervention of Lux, Tano and Steela. In the ensuing chaos, one of the falling gunships hit a cliff they were on, causing Lux and Steela to fall. Tano saved Lux and nearly saved Steela, but a rogue shot incapacitated Tano temporarily, causing Steela to fall to her death. The battle was won, but many fighters, including their commander, were felled. When the shattered remains returned to Aziz, Kalani knew the war was over. In a meeting with Dooku via hologram, Rash implored for more droids, which Dooku refused, telling Kalani to salvage what was possible and retreat to the planet Agamar. The tactical droid began to execute this order, but not before executing Rash. Though the conflict was minuscule compared to the galaxy-wide war, the operation was a success, proving that this kind of local resistance training was a viable strategy, and as such the Republic began to deploy teams to train insurgents on many CIS-held worlds. This deprived the CIS of the only offensive strategy they were capable of executing, that of garnering strength via adding new member worlds through subjugation of defenseless or disorganized populations. With this, the CIS would be even more hard-pressed to find solid footing for their attempted offensives. The twilight of the Confederacy had come, though no one knew this yet, and the clock was now truly ticking. Though it would have been more beneficial for the CIS to hold Onderon, Dooku's attention was averted elsewhere, primarily settling an old score and fulfilling his Dark Master's ambitions, as his plan was coming to its climactic conclusion. To make sure everything went accordingly, loose ends had to be tied up. One of these was the former apprentice of Dooku, Asajj Ventress. She was presumed dead following the Battle of Sullust, as mentioned previously, as a result of Dooku's betrayal, who was ordered by Sidious to execute her as a sign of loyalty. Dooku reluctantly did so, as he still valued her as an important asset, but still he did his master's bidding. Ventress survived this assassination attempt and fled to her home planet of Dathomir to reunite with her old family, the clan of Mother Talzin, belonging to the infamous witches of Dathomir, the Night Sisters. She was rescued by Mother Talzin herself and brought within the Night Sisters' fortress and nurtured back to health. Upon regaining her senses, her thoughts all turned towards revenge. She believed she could never be whole unless she slew Dooku. In this endeavor, she found a willing ally in Talzin, who held a grudge against the Sith, specifically Dooku's master Darth Sidious, and hoped she could get her revenge by ruining his plans. As Ventress retrained herself alongside her newfound sisters, Talzin concocted a plan which called for Ventress, alongside two Night Sisters, to invade Dooku's palace on Sereno, utilizing Jedi sabers and poison to incapacitate and kill the Count. The plan ultimately failed, as Dooku proved a formidable foe despite his vision being temporarily impaired. However, he did not identify his attackers properly as Talzin intended, leading to the next part of her plan. Dooku was alarmed that his palace had been invaded so easily, and decided to take on a new Dathomirian apprentice, contacting Mother Talzin to do so. As she wanted to keep the guise of being on friendly terms with the Sith, she gave him the newly christened Savage Appress. Having been enhanced by Night Sister magics, he was made stronger, taller, and far more fierce than a normal Dathomirian, which is saying something. Pleased, Dooku began to train him in the dark arts, to the level where he was able to kill a Jedi Master with ease on Deveron. Dooku saw more potential in him than with Ventress, who he still felt was a great loss in his own overall plan to overthrow Sidious. He sent Savage to Toydaria, where he was to capture King Katunko, but his new apprentice encountered both Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker, and a fierce fight ensued, which resulted in Savage accidentally killing Katunko. Dooku, who arrived on his dreadnought to possibly assist Savage, was enraged that he killed the king, and started punishing him. It continued until Ventress arrived, and ordered Savage to her side. They teamed up to slay Dooku, all part of Talzin's plan. However, the fight did not go as planned for either party. As Savage was beaten by Dooku and berated by Ventress, he lashed out and threw the pair of them away using the Force before fleeing the fight. Dooku then once again overpowered Ventress, who barely escaped with her life, and fled into the stars, dejected at the loss. Dooku had kept her watch out for her all this time, and with her returning to Dathomir, he decided to settle the score and the threat to the Sith Grand Plan once and for all. Summoning Grievous, he ordered the general to lead a large force consisting of 2 Recusant-class light destroyers, 4 Munificent-class frigates, a Providence-class dreadnought, and a large force of droids to invade Dathomir with the objective of killing Ventress and Talzin, and finally the eradication of the Night Sisters. The attack came as a sudden surprise to the denizens of Dathomir, having been in the middle of a celebration for the baptism of Ventress into the Sisterhood. Dooku's silence had fooled them into believing he still hadn't learned about their part in the assassination attempts. Grievous caught the Night Sisters unaware. He ordered an immediate landing upon Dathomir, near the Night Sister fortress, though out of range enough for them to deploy, as he wanted a pitched fight rather than a drawn-out siege. To drive them from their defensive position, he sent several groups of Hyena and Vulture-class ships to bombard the fortress, which is what alerted Talzin's group to the invasion. With the Night Sisters scrambling, Grievous made landfall with his invasion force in a clearing west of the fortress. His army would have to penetrate through the woodland to reach their target, putting them at a disadvantage, as the Night Sisters were adept in fighting in this terrain. But that is where his prior moves came into play. The element of surprise gave him the advantage of an uncontested landing, which gave him time to deploy his armoured tanks in the front and his B-1 and B-2 droids in lines behind them. Secondly, his bombing runs upon the fortress pinned down the Night Sisters, preventing them from coherently forming, as well as scouting his position. Only when he was near right on top of the fortress did they know where he was, a brilliant example of what made General Grievous so feared. Ventress, after analysing the situation, judged their position to be untenable should they not receive reinforcements. Talzin thus left her in command of the Night Sisters, while she went to the Elder, known as Old Daka, to obtain them. Ventress gathered her brethren and made towards the oncoming droids, attacking them via the ground and the trees, with herself leading the ground advance. They were able to push back the line, but the droids' numbers, along with the deployment of commando droids and the CIS defoliated tank, began to drive them back. However, the tide would turn, as zombie-like Night Sisters began to rise and take to the fight with brutal, mindless savagery. Old Daka had resurrected the fallen and buried dead to aid their sisters once more. This unexpected addition drove the droids back to the landing site, where Grievous had just disembarked. A standoff ensued, as Ventress challenged Grievous to a duel, though when Ventress obtained the upper hand, Grievous had his droids intervene, starting the battle anew. Ventress was soon wounded, and Grievous set upon her, but he himself was driven back by the undead. Ventress was being helped off the field, but her aide was killed. Distraught at seeing so many of her friends perish, Ventress fled into the woods, abandoning the fight. Talzin decided to try and end the battle by attacking Dooku directly, having Old Daka use magic that caused great agony and torture to Dooku, utilising a lock of his hair they had in their possession. They demanded he call off his army, which he refused. Enduring the pain, he gave Grievous orders to eliminate Old Daka and Talzin, whose magic would manifest as a green smoke. Grievous ordered the advance be kept up, as he himself took a squadron to hunt down the witches. It did not take long, and though Talzin escaped, Old Daka was killed by Grievous. This ended Dooku's torment and the resurrection spell. With their greatest boon gone, the battle now turned into a massacre, as Grievous hunted down the sisters one by one and bombed every village he could find. He effectively ended the Night Sisters for good, though Talzin and Ventress remained as threats to the Sith plan. Though minor skirmishes and battles would continue to take place, Onderon, which we covered in our last installment, was the final major action of the year 20 BBY. As the year turned into 19 BBY, the Republic offensive was grinding ever forward. Felucia, Seleucami, and Megiddo were heavily contested, with more fleets poised to strike other targets. But a troubling event was also set to occur on the planet leading the coalition of neutral star systems, Mandalore. Fans of Star Wars are very familiar with the world of Mandalore. Still, for first-time viewers, Mandalore is a famous planet within the galaxy, primarily due to its martial culture and renowned warriors who went toe-to-toe with even the Jedi at several points. However, those days were long behind the planet, as the current administration, led by the Duchess of the planet, Satine Kryze, championed a pacifist movement dubbed New Mandalore, with policies in place that sought to move the people away from their warring past, including disarmament, revised education, and moving the capital from the historical capital of Keldabe to Sundari. It was by no means an easy or short process, but as the years went on, New Mandalore was becoming more of a reality than a dream. This dream had its opposition, and with its successful progress, the opposition began to turn violent in their attempts to tear New Mandalore down and restore its militaristic traditions. Though there were many different cells, the largest and most active was known as Death Watch, led by the ex-governor of Concordia, Pre Vizsla. He was able to keep his involvement with Death Watch a secret until he attempted to kill the Duchess, along with her friend Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi. The two successfully escaped his assassination attempts, and he went into hiding, his true allegiance now revealed. That was years ago by now. Since his exposure, Death Watch had been fairly inactive due to their loss of personnel in key positions, though they still gathered support, as the continuation of the wider war brought hardships to Mandalore, forcing them to rely heavily on the black market to bring in necessary imports. This revelation would cause a scandal that forced the Prime Minister of Mandalore, a man named Almec, to step down. Death Watch would find an opportunity within the worsening situation, or it would be more appropriate to say an outside actor would seize the initiative, a group known as the Shadow Collective. Though Pre Vizsla was a leader of this newly formed group, the collective's true architect was someone far more cunning and devious, the recently re-emerged Sith Lord Maul, along with his brother Savage Opress. Having gathered support via coercion and extravagant promises, Maul was able to gather several crime syndicates together to make the collective. With their support, he planned to overthrow Satine and place Pre Vizsla on the throne of Mandalore. With the Republic fully committed to their offensive, and the CIS having no forces to intervene, Maul set his plan in motion. Possibly using the aforementioned illicit black market dealings as a paper excuse, he sent the crime families of the collective to attack Mandalore. This set Satine's government into a panic. As though they tried to subdue the attacks, they stood little chance, being that they had no standing army and the forces they did have lacked any military experience. It became bad enough that the people of Sundari marched on the palace and demanded action from the Duchess. This is when their apparent saviors arrived. Pre Vizsla came with Death Watch at his back and promised to beat back the invaders and restore peace to Mandalore. They did this with obvious ease, just as Maul planned. The victory also gained Death Watch the adulation of the people, who, with the years of struggle due to the war having taken a heavy toll on them, and feeling as though Satine couldn't protect them, elected Pre Vizsla as the new leader of Mandalore, ousting Satine and her government. It would not take long for the victors to quarrel among themselves, as Pre Vizsla had Maul and Savage arrested and thrown in prison, where he also placed Satine. Maul had anticipated this, however. He approached and ousted the also imprisoned Prime Minister Almec, and proposed for him to rule as a puppet in place while Maul took control, to which Almec agreed. With all going according to plan, Maul easily broke free of the prison and made his way to the palace, challenging Vizsla to a duel for the right to lead. Vizsla, as a champion of Mandalore's old traditions, was honor-bound to accept. The duel was brief, with Maul defeating and then beheading Vizsla, taking control of Death Watch and most of the Mandalorians save for a small subset who refused to follow a non-Mandalorian like Maul, causing a violent outbreak between the factions. These rebels were led by Satine's disillusioned sister Bo-Katan, who, after escaping Maul, tried to free her sister, realizing the devil's deal they had made in accepting the Sith Lord's aid and hoping her good relations with the Republic could overturn their current dilemma. They were able to break Satine out, and she sent a message to the Jedi Temple, but she was soon recaptured. The situation alarmed the Jedi, but they had no men or material to spare, given most of their experienced fighters were fighting in the Outer Rim. Luckily for Satine, her old friend Kenobi was able to respond. They couldn't send military forces, so they opted for a breakout mission to free Satine and use her for political backing of a later invasion of Mandalore. That is where their luck would end, as Kenobi, like Bo-Katan, was able to free Satine, but she and Kenobi were soon recaptured by Maul, who was able to cut off their escape. Maul then executed Satine in front of Kenobi within the palace, satisfying a long-standing grudge he held against Kenobi and wanting to even the score with him. This also took out his opposition's legitimate figurehead. Maul would, however, regret not killing Kenobi as soon Bo-Katan freed the Jedi and he escaped the world as a civil war engulfed the city of Sundari. Though this was a good opportunity for the CIS or the Republic to intervene and bring the lead planet of the neutral star systems on their side, they did not do so. This speaks volumes about not only each side's fighting condition at this point, but also how much each side had committed to their current campaigns. With the pressure the Republic was putting on the front, the CIS hoped to divert the Republic's attention and secure vital resources they desperately needed. One of these was the heart of the Trade Federation, Cato Nemoida. The Separatists sent a force to take the planet, to place it officially in CIS hands, given the Federation's alleged neutrality in the conflict so far, despite clear support of the CIS. In response, the Republic sent General Skywalker and Commander Tano with their 501st Legion to repulse the attack, but their foe was still as hard to fight as ever, and a bombing incident at the Jedi Temple forced both commanders to be recalled. The advance stalled, and the Republic left Cato Nemoida to the Separatists, with intent to capture it another day. Seeing their success, the CIS tried to replicate it by attacking Ringo Vinde, which held an orbital shipyard, something they vitally needed to continue the war. They were able to seize it in a lightning strike led by the presumed dead Admiral Trench. To retake the shipyard, the Republic dispatched General Skywalker and the 501st yet again, this time aided by additional forces commanded by the Jedi twins Tiplar and Tipli. Thanks to their numerical advantage in ships supplied by the Open Circle fleet, they were able to board the shipyards. But a fierce fight lasting several days brought nothing but stalemate, as each hall and hangar was savagely fought over. Skywalker devised a strategy that brought them within striking distance of Trench's headquarters, but the death of Tiplar due to friendly fire ruined the momentum of the assault, and ground the fight to a stalemate yet again. Nothing more is said of this battle, but due to events later on, we can guess that the CIS were forced to abandon the shipyards due to a necessity for their forces to be deployed on other fronts, as well as the shipyards serving no functional purpose whilst the Republic held them under siege. Across the galaxy, another situation was developing, this time with the intergalactic banking clan. The banking clan, or the IGBC, was the primary source of funds for both sides throughout the war. Lending loans to both sides made them seem like a true neutral party, unlike the Trade Federation, whose blatant actions in backing the CIS made it apparent who they were truly affiliated with. However, the IGBC facade had begun to crumble. Their former chairman being on the Separatist Council became apparent to the Republic, thanks to an investigation by Senators Amidala and Clovis. Clovis being the former senator that represented the banking clan. The investigation revealed corruption perpetrated by the Five, the leaders of the IGBC, who sought to line their own pockets, as well as revealing the IGBC's dealings with the CIS, loaning them money with no interest. With this now out in the open, the Five were promptly removed from power, and as a reward for his part, Rush Clovis was installed as leader of the IGBC. But his success would ultimately prove to be his undoing, as Count Dooku had played a role in helping him uncover the corruption, and now he came to demand repayment. Not long after he had become leader of the IGBC, Clovis raised interest rates on Republic loans, with Dooku forcing him under threat of blackmail. This understandably infuriated the Senate, which began to debate measures to be taken, one of which included the occupation of Scipio, the headquarters of the IGBC, but soon news would reach them that would hasten their debate. Amidala's Republic delegation, which consisted of her, a few servants, and a detachment of the Coruscant Guard under Commander Thrawn, had yet to depart Scipio, and were trying to convince Clovis to reverse his decision, but soon they were set upon by a CIS invasion force. Dooku had arrived with his personal flotilla of 3 Munificent-class frigates, 2 dual-hemisphere omni-support vessels, and his flagship, a Providence-class dreadnought. ordering his forces to immediately occupy the planet. They unleashed their hyena bombers to rake the landing pads, catching the clones unaware. Many of them would be killed by the bombs, along with destroying all of their ships. Thrawn commanded the rest of his men to make way for the city gates, where they could mount a more effective defense, but droid dropships cut them off and landed B-2 battle droids and commandos, both between them and the gate and behind them. Thrawn warned Amidala of the danger, and seeing as he could do nothing more, he and his guard decided to take down as many droids as they could, though they had no hope of victory, as each was cut down in turn until only Thrawn himself remained. He heroically took down several enemy droids before falling to multiple shots himself. Amidala, meanwhile, was trapped within the city, as Dooku had made sure to target all spacecraft and either destroy or capture them. Amidala was able to set up a hologram connection to Chancellor Palpatine and explain the situation, and with the meeting ending in her capture, there could be only one response. The Senate convened for an emergency vote and called for an immediate occupation of Scipio, as it was evident to them that Clovis and the IGBC had chosen their side. Skywalker was put in command of the operation and was given a fleet that consisted of 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers and 2 Arquitens-class light cruisers, as well as his command of the 501st Legion. Upon arrival at the planet, Skywalker had his fighters deployed in the first line, and in the second he placed his dropships with himself in direct command, trusting his fleet to pin the enemy in place while he and the clones captured Scipio. It soon became apparent that the Separatists were outmatched, as they began to take heavy losses, and Dooku ordered the flotilla's withdrawal after Skywalker had pierced the line. On the ground, the CIS forces were unaware of the situation and prepared to parry the assault, deploying hyena bombers to intercept the dropships. They were beaten back and forced to contend with the clones' ARC fighters, who were escorting them. Once they deployed on the landing pads, they quickly pushed the droids back against the gates. Skywalker pushed ahead to rescue Senator Amidala, leaving Captain Rex in command to finish the droid forces off. He would do so not long after. Thanks to the Republic's near-total air superiority, the battle began to sputter out, and with Skywalker able to save Amidala, the battle was brought to an end. The fall of Scipio and the death of Clovis in the fight left the banking clan in the hands of the Republic. Though many were puzzled as to the actions of Clovis and his CIS allies, it was chalked up to another lash-out attempt, like the CIS had been doing in recent months. Others, however, grew concerned, particularly with the rising powers of the Chancellor. Palpatine had full legislative control, full power over the military, and was now given control of the banking clan. Many wondered if he would give up his emergency powers as the war seemingly approached its end, or was the Republic perhaps changing into something no one had thought possible? Although the invasion of Scipio seemed minor when it transpired, its repercussions were heavily felt by the CIS. Though the intergalactic banking clan served as the primary source of funds for both sides of the war, the CIS were far more heavily dependent upon them, given that the IGBC gave them loans interest-free, practically giving them money. With the loss of this funding source and the additional loss of the Trade Federation, due to its neutrality being terminated by the CIS occupation of Cato Nemoida, the CIS needed to seize assets, not only to renew their war effort, but even just to survive. As mentioned, they had launched an offensive aimed at capturing the orbital shipyards of Ringo Vinda, but this would not bring any lasting results, as the Republic quickly returned to lay siege. One may say this was a test run for a much larger and riskier offensive, as Admiral Trench, who was in charge of the Ringo Vinda assault, would soon launch another attempt to claim a system, this time against the crucial world of Anaxes. It was not a populous planet, nor resource-rich by any means. Its importance lay in its strategic position and the shipyard. Situated on the Polemian trade route, it served as the entrance from the Outer Rim into the Inner Rim. This is more than likely what prompted it to become a major shipyard before the war, and by 3 years in, it was important to the Republic's war effort. Since the Republic would no doubt be on guard following the Ringo Vinda attack, the CIS sent a diversionary assault by finally attacking the planet of Kashyyyk, the homeworld of the Wookiees, and another major strategic point for the Republic, thanks to the many hyperlanes it sat on. With the Republic launching a new offensive on Cato Nemoida, led by Jedi Master Plo Koon, and the diversionary assault on Kashyyyk, Trench made quickly for Anaxes, which was probably lightly guarded thanks to its great distance from the front line, making it an unlikely target. Trench was able to take the majority of the planet, but thanks to its accessibility from the core worlds, a swift response would be sent by the Republic. The planet garrison was able to delay Trench long enough for the Republic to deploy a task force consisting of the 7th Sky Corps under General Obi-Wan Kenobi, the 501st Legion under General Anakin Skywalker, and the 187th Battalion under General Mace Windu. As is often the case within this war, we don't have exact numbers on the ground forces nor the fleets. Still, we can surmise that Trench arrived with at least 3 Providence-class dreadnoughts, one of which was his flagship the Invulnerable, somewhere above 7 Munificent-class frigates, 2 or more Recusant-class light destroyers, and several dual-hemisphere Omni-support vessels. Likewise, the Republic fleet was fairly large, sporting around 7 Aquitens-class cruisers, 7 or more Venator-class star destroyers, and 3 Consular-class cruisers. Skywalker was put in command of the orbital battle, while Kenobi and Windu led the ground forces. They were faced with problems soon after their arrival, as both fronts were taking heavy losses. The droids delivered precise counterattacks that seemed to undermine each of the clones' offensives. The situation became critical when the droids were nearing the planet's main production facility. Seeing the dire situation, the Jedi were willing to do whatever it took to reverse it. To this end, they greenlit a mission suggested by Captain Rex that involved heading behind enemy lines to discover what he believed was an algorithm in CIS hands deciphering their strategies. Captain Rex and Commander Cody were sent with Clone Force 99, whose utilization of genetic alterations made their tactics unpredictable and foreign to standard clone procedure. This would serve them well, as they were able to infiltrate the enemy facility successfully and discovered the source of the algorithm to be the captured clone Commando Echo, located on Skako Minor, deep in Techno-Union space. Having discovered this, Skywalker took command of the unit and led them to their new target. Though they faced resistance, they were able to save and extract Echo from the planet, returning to Anaxes, where the situation had grown grim, as even though Echo was gone, the database still had the clone's strategies. Echo, now fully revitalized, suggested a plan that called for another infiltration mission, this time to Trench's command ship, where he could use the cybernetics given to him by the CIS to hack into the ship's mainframe. Skywalker was once again put in charge of the mission, while Kenobi and Windu would lead a large-scale assault to distract the enemy. Both teams completed their objectives, with Echo deactivating all or at least the majority of the droids on Anaxes. There was a core breaker bomb capable of destroying Anaxes, but this too was disarmed thanks to Echo and Skywalker. The latter managed to get the code from Trench before killing him and destroying his ship, this time for good, and so ended the Battle of Anaxes and one of the most talented commanders of the CIS. Though the CIS had hoped this attack would stall the Republic offensive, it instead brought them closer to their limit, as the majority of their forces were, as we've discussed, on worlds trying to hold back the Republic. The failure to take Anaxes and the loss of the entire force nearly crippled the CIS for good, and the Republic intended to take advantage, though another pressing concern would soon arise. With the CIS assault blunted, the forces mustered to hold and possibly retake Anaxes were in a prime position to be moved to other fronts. Opportunity came when the Republic received a message from the ex-Jedi commander Ahsoka Tano, who had a run-in with Mandalorian rebel Bo-Katan. Bo-Katan revealed to Tano that the new government of Mandalore was not run by Almec, as had been publicized, but was instead run by the Sith Lord Darth Maul. At the same time, this information was already being relayed by General Kenobi, who had taken part in the Battle of Sundari. The Republic had been tied up dealing with other matters, but with forces to spare now, as well as having a foot inside of the planet's political sphere, they decided to link up with Tano to oust Almec and replace him with a pro-Republic figure, as well as to capture Maul in hopes of revealing his insidious master, who the Jedi had come to believe was the mastermind behind the entire war. The Republic decided to give the task to Generals Kenobi and Skywalker, given their history with Tano, and success with planetary insurrectionist operations. Their force would consist of the entirety of the 501st Legion, as well as 3 Venator-class Star Destroyers. This was deemed sufficient, as Mandalore had no navy to speak of, and the CIS were unlikely to be able to aid them on that front if they did indeed join the opposing side, however unlikely that was given its floundering position. Just as they had united with the rebel force, however, alarming news came. Coruscant was under attack by General Grievous, and all forces within reach were called upon to aid in the defense of the capital. Knowing the importance of both taking Mandalore and defending the capital, Skywalker split a section of the 501st and gave it over to the newly promoted Commander Rex. The 332nd Company would go to Mandalore under his and Tano's command, while the remainder followed Skywalker and Kenobi to Coruscant. Many of you may wonder why the CIS hasn't yet attacked Coruscant given its importance to the Republic. If they had done so earlier in the war, they would have had a better chance, as the Republic wasn't fully militarized. The answer to that is Coruscant's position. Its location in the core made it virtually impossible to surprise attack, as several stations and fleets had to be bypassed to reach it. With that in mind, the next logical question is how they pulled it off now, as they were pushed the furthest away from the core they had ever been. The answer is the astrography of the deep core. At the center of the galaxy was an untraversable area where the black hole that bound the galaxy together was. Surrounding this was a maze of difficult-to-navigate paths, from which Grievous launched his attack. This may answer the question of where Grievous had been for the past several months, as he makes no appearances in any major battles in 19 BBY. He had slowly been building up his force within the deep core, and given the timing of the attack, it is probable that the CIS were intending this to be the coup de grace to pair with the assault on Anaxes. The scale of the battle was unlike any other, as the CIS were counting on this ending the war. The numbers are not given exactly, but it is estimated they had massed 1,000 or more ships to assault Coruscant, a truly gargantuan force, and more than likely the majority of the CIS navy still remaining, resulting in one of the largest battles in galactic history. This force was made up of Munificent-class frigates, Lucrehulk-class battleships, Recusant-class light destroyers, and Providence-class dreadnoughts. The massive force slipped out of hyperspace within striking distance of the planet. The Coruscant Home Defense Fleet, though large itself, was dwarfed by the incoming attackers, and immediately assumed a defensive stance just above the planet. Grievous had timed his attack to coincide with a scheduled Senate meeting to ensure many important political figures would be on-world, though his primary target was the most important, Chancellor Palpatine. Leaving his fleet to press the defenders, he took his flagship, a Providence-class carrier destroyer, the Invisible Hand, and made a lightning attack against the planet, personally landing on-world with a small force. He was able to dispatch those guarding Palpatine, and made a quick getaway, though he was pursued by several Jedi. They were thrown off his trail with a large assault of buzz droids that kept the Jedi starfighters at bay. He imprisoned Palpatine aboard his ship, and broadcast his capture to the galaxy. His triumph, and whatever strategic aspirations he had in mind, were short-lived, as upon returning to his ship, he was informed that the Republic reinforcements had already begun to arrive the moment he landed on the planet, and by now were growing to a size comparable to the CIS force. This included hundreds of Venator-class Star Destroyers, and similarly large numbers of other craft. Grievous had his fleet press into these incoming reinforcements, as he reckoned he would be able to destroy or damage the majority of them, as well as give his fleet the space it needed to fully extract. However, this strategy began to fail him, as more and more Republic ships began to come to the fight, until eventually the death blow arrived, in the form of the entirety of the Open Circle fleet, led by General Kenobi with Skywalker in tow. Until now it had been a stiff matchup, but finally Grievous's fleet was trapped between the Republic and Coruscant, which by now had fully armed their planetary defenses, and Republic ships were interwoven in his lines. Knowing he could not escape with his entire fleet, he opted to find a route for his ship, so he had his fleet mass around him until an opening could be formed. With the Invisible Hand being covered by multiple ships, and not wanting to risk the Chancellor's life, Kenobi and Skywalker opted to take to their starfighters and infiltrate the ship themselves. This was not an easy task, as they had to weave through Vulture and Buzz droids to get to the ship, but they nevertheless boarded the ship. Once on board, they were able to locate the Chancellor, and discovered that he was being guarded by none other than Count Dooku himself. A fight broke out that rendered Kenobi unconscious, but Skywalker managed to best the Sith Lord, and, at the behest of Palpatine, beheaded Dooku on the spot. Though they were temporarily captured by Grievous while attempting to escape, they dueled the cyborg, hoping to take down the rest of the CIS leadership in one stroke, but he managed to escape. Seeing as he had lost the Chancellor and Dooku, he abandoned his ship and ordered a retreat for the rest of the CIS force, bringing the battle to a close. Anaxes was already a crippling blow, but Coruscant was the mortal wound. Grievous had hoped to replicate his prior successes with such quick assaults, but times had changed since those achievements. The Republic's military and industrial might was well beyond full swing. Within a few minutes of his attack, several hundred Venators had already arrived, robbing Grievous of his primary weapon. He beat a hasty retreat to Utapau, bringing the Separatist Council in tow, now taking the role of the de facto leader of the CIS, with the shocking death of Dooku, whose loss destabilized their upper echelons and crippled the CIS's ability to coordinate. Meanwhile, on the other side of the galaxy, Tano had successfully besieged Mandalore. Her forces held the majority of the capital of Sundari and had captured Almec, though they were currently waging a guerrilla war with Maul's forces. With Grievous on the run and the majority of the CIS military power tied up in the Outer Rim sieges, the Republic put its effort into finding the cyborg himself, giving the duty to General Kenobi. They believed his loss would deprive the CIS of any unifying figurehead and would ultimately bring the rebel worlds to terms. Though the inevitable end was in sight, the CIS forces still under siege in the Outer Rim were determined to hold out. Some believed they could bring the Republic to the negotiating table. In contrast, others probably saw surrender as not an option. The war had lasted for a long time, and the anger that began the war was hotter than ever, with giving in not even crossing their minds. However, reality did not support their views of protracting the conflict. The juggernaut that was the droid army was all but spent. Having lost the resources to make new droids, and having all of their production facilities either destroyed or under siege, meant that they were losing more droids than they could field. Nevertheless, they still diverted resources to Kashyyyk, which by now had gone from a diversionary assault to a committed effort to take the planet. We have mentioned Kashyyyk's importance prior to this, but to reiterate, it was a high-priority planet for the Republic, as it was situated on several hyperlanes, and was the homeworld of the Wookiees, a species that were some of the earliest space voyagers, who still held navigational charts that held secret routes throughout the galaxy. One would wonder why this planet wasn't made a priority by the CIS earlier in the war, but whether it was due to inability, as they also did not reinforce nearby Umbara, or because it interfered with the plans of Dooku's master, we shall never know. What we can do is speculate on the current escalation of the conflict, as it is possible they did not withdraw from Kashyyyk as they hoped to occupy this super hub, not only to cut the long supply lines that led to the disparate sieges throughout the Outer Rim, but also to possibly bring the Republic to the negotiating table with their new staging ground, at the threat of protracted conflict through the sieges. At the outset of the battle, the locals made up the majority of the defenders, as the Wookiees, like many others, hoped to remain neutral in this conflict by not having Republic troops. This didn't stop the CIS from invading them. The world of Kashyyyk was covered in dense forests, with gigantic trees and idyllic oceans, making it both a beautiful world and a challenge to invade. The capital of the planet, Kachiho City, was located on one of the many archipelagos that dotted the planet. Initially, General Grievous led the attack. Making landfall upon the Wawat archipelago, where the city was located, he was able to take a few of the islands before a response from the Republic came in the form of Jedi Master Luminara Unduli in command of the 41st Corps, accompanied by Quinlan Vos. The arrival of the reinforcements began to stymie his advance, as the Wookiees and the Mobile Ranger Corps of the 41st deployed guerrilla methods. Grievous might have been able to push further. Still, he left to command other operations, namely the pending attack on Coruscant. In his place, he left an ST tactical droid named Lindawo, who seems to have been fairly competent, as the droids were able to make it within range of the capital during the aftermath of the Battle of Coruscant. With the capital now under threat and the majority of the CIS forces contained, the Republic dispatched a large task force under the command of Jedi Master Yoda to aid the Wookiees, as he had good relations with them. Yoda was able to prepare a suitable defense after observing the droids' targets, primarily an oil refinery on the outskirts of the city, which hints at Lindawo's lack of resources. The droids would make several attempts to land forces on the island, with each attempted beachhead being thrown back into the sea. With nothing to lose and everything to gain, they would not be stopped until they won or were destroyed entirely, outside events that would compel a swifter end to the battle. It wouldn't be long before Tano and Kenobi both would find their quarry. Tano was able to corner and capture Maul after a prolonged fight, while Kenobi tracked Grievous down to the aforementioned planet of Utapau, where he dueled and killed the cyborg general. These twin victories would be the last offensive operations of the war, as not long after, with everything complete according to his designs, Palpatine revealed himself to be the long-sought Sith Lord Darth Sidious. This was revealed only to a select few, one of them being Anakin Skywalker, whom he seduced to the dark side after securing his help in killing Jedi Master Windu. With everything complete, Sidious enacted the final part of his grand plan. He opened a channel to all clone commanders and instructed them to execute Order 66, an order encrypted into every clone's biochip installed in them at birth, with the directive to kill the traitors to the Republic, these being the Jedi themselves. With the best of the Jedi being spread out in the Outer Rim commanding the sieges, and the others at the Temple, the Jedi were cut down in droves, with Skywalker personally leading the 501st to slaughter the majority within the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, believing they had grown corrupt and were plotting to become masters of the Republic. Some, like Tano, were able to survive this purge and went into hiding. Skywalker, now under the new title of Darth Vader, was sent to Mustafar by Sidious to kill the entirety of the Separatist Council, who had been stationed there by Grievous under the direction of Sidious himself. Vader killed all of the members of the Council, but was soon confronted by his former master, Kenobi, who had survived his own force's attempt to kill him during Order 66 on Utapau. The two came to an impasse and fought each other on the burning planet until eventually Kenobi got the upper hand and seemingly mortally wounded Vader, leaving him to his fate as he could not bring himself to finish his former apprentice off. The galaxy-spanning civil war was over. Sidious had the droids deactivated, and those who still held out did not do so for long. With all the power in his hands and none to oppose him, Sidious declared the reformation of the Galactic Republic into the First Galactic Empire. Though the veneer of democracy was kept at first, through the Senate, it was but a facade, as the authoritarianism the former members of the CIS had feared had come to pass, and real authority was slowly moved into the hands of new governors. A shadow now fell upon a galaxy now ruled by an emperor with his dark apprentice. With only waning hope to guide them, the citizens of the Empire could only recall from memory the days of a free republic, and dream for a new hope to free them. Thank you for journeying with us for so long in the galaxy far, far away. We hope you enjoyed our retelling of the epic story of the Clone Wars. We presented it to you with all the determined dedication and passionate labour we could muster. In our next series on Star Wars, we will talk about the Yuuzhan Vong War. If you don't want to miss that, subscribe and press the bell button. And we're also planning to cover the battles of many other fantasy, sci-fi and space opera universes. Please consider liking and sharing as it helps immensely, and don't forget to comment. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to know what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.